the street anywhere near an off-licence, you'd expect to be clobbered on budget day. But in fact, beer and wine drinkers, we think, may not pay any more. Spirit drinkers may pay even less because the Chancellor wants to encourage them to buy their drink in this country instead of hopping across the channel for it. Smokers have no such luck. We think they may well be hit up 5p a packet, we're saying. And as for Alco Pops drinkers, they look to get hammered, 10 to 20p a bottle on them because the government does not like Alco Pops one little bit. Let's just move a few yards down our special street here, mind the car, towards the petrol station, see if this budget will inflict damage on car drivers. In short, we think it might well. Petrol and diesel up 3p a litre. That's quite a lot. That'll raise £1 billion for the Treasury. There may be a greenifying of the car tax disc so that cars with bigger engines pay more. Cars with smaller engines could pay even less than they do now. So Lada and Skoda drivers may have a day of rejoicing if they can get down to the post office without breaking down. Company cars could well be walloped here. That's been much heralded. And office parking tax might come in. Now, that was taken out in 1988 because of administrative problems. That may be reintroduced because the Chancellor wants to persuade people not to drive into work. Now, we can't see down here whether there are any office car parking spaces at George's Nuts and Bolts factory, but we do have a view on tax as it affects companies. Advanced corporation tax is a complex tax. Essentially, if the government reduces it, they take in more money. We think they will. One side effect of that is to cut a tax credit on shared dividends. Pension fund managers may squeal about that. The government could funnel some money back to companies via the corporation tax, make a straight cut in that, down 1%. Now let's look at the centrepiece of our street here, Stirling Street, or if not Stirling Street, then the budget itself. That's our privatised utility there. It's got a big metal fence around it and a danger high voltage sign. That won't stop the government getting in to collect its share of what we estimate will be around £5 billion for the windfall tax on the privatised utilities. They're inside there flicking through their excess profits, wondering how much they're going to have to pay and how the charge is going to be levied. But while they're rather miserable in there, if we just pop round the corner past the pub, avoid the temptation to pop in, we find that they are very happy indeed at the Go-Ahead Employment Agency here because the windfall tax is money coming their way. Employers' rebate coming in, £60 a week for employers who take on the young or long-term unemployed. Those are rebated national insurance contributions, the environmental task force being introduced, and also people can train and claim benefit at the same time. A few yards down the road here, we find they're watching the television very avidly through those windows because that's the Social Security office there, and they're asking the question, will single mothers get help on childcare? And will parents of 16 to 18-year-olds who are at school lose child benefit? Two key questions inside the Social Security office. Well, now, before we leave Stirling Street, our graphicised street, let's just whistle across the middle of the street here, past the shops, and go up to the house that's for sale just here, because I want to show you this. If you're interested in it, do bear in mind that there may well be a cut in tax relief on mortgages. Myris could be cut in this budget, value cut. Some are predicting from 15% to 10%. There could be as well a doubling or a trebling of stamp duty, particularly on bigger homes. That's worth watching out for as well. And perhaps that's why if we just shuttle a bit to the left here and go up to the door of number 29 and just gently nudge it open. Couple inside look rather glum. They're thinking about their Myris. They're also thinking about income tax changes. They've heard Labour talking about this new 10p ban that they may introduce. Doesn't mean anything until we know how wide it is or where it bites in, and critically, whether it affects the married couples and personal allowances. But while they may be pondering all that rather uneasily in the front doorway, in their hallway there, it is worth just relaxing them with this final thought that throughout the general election campaign, continuously Labour said, as far as income tax rates were concerned, there would be no increase. So that, unless there's been some dreadful event with the public finances, is a rock-solid prediction. We'll leave our residents of Stirling Street waiting for the facts, which they won't have long to wait for, from Mr. Brown himself. David.
Jeremy, thanks very much. And we'll be coming back to you in a moment to meet some of the families from Stoke-on-Trent and see whether they have smiles or frowns on their faces, yes? See you in a bit.
Yep.
Diana Madill now in Chester, and let's hear from some of the people who are watching very closely to see what happens here. Diana.
Good afternoon from Chester. Welcome to the city centre. Now, Chester is a city with a rather patchy economic recovery. Unemployment is falling, but it's still higher than the national average. Labour won the seat at the expense of the Tories in the election. There are lots of Labour voters with very high expectations of a Labour Chancellor. Fiona Winders is from the Citizens Advice Bureau. Paint a picture of Chester and what it needs from the budget.
Well, Chester does need help in terms of unemployment. There's particularly high levels of youth unemployment, so we welcome the fact that it's high on the agenda for the new government.
So what about the welfare to work scheme that's been mooted?
Well, we do have some reservations about the welfare to work scheme because there's a question mark over whether it will lead to long long-term, secure jobs for unemployed people, which is what they need.
What about a 10 pence starting rate in tax? That's been talked about too.
Well, again, that would help low-income families, but it should be remembered that the poorest 30% of households in this country don't pay any income tax at all, so the impact of this measure would pass them by completely.
One of the things which Labour has announced, and it will be in the budget today, is to scrap tax relief for people over 60 who take out private medical insurance. Dr. George Foster, what do you make of that?
Well, if he does do this, it'll be very bad news for our health service waiting lists. It's precisely this age group who use the health service the most and who cost the most to treat. And my understanding is that 50% of the elderly are likely to drop their private cover. That means when they need health care, they're going to come to the health service and add themselves to waiting lists that are already too long.
So ironically, it could backfire on the health service. Let's find out about the housing market in Chester with Lynn Higgins and Tim Matthews. Tim, is it buoyant?
It's buoyant, it's busy, and it's on a good, steady footing. But we're not experiencing this price spiral and increases that they are in the southeast. And it's very fragile, and what worries me is that it could be easily affected by swinging stamp duty or the abolition of Maris.
Lynn Higgins, what do you think Chester could sustain if Maris were to be faded out or, in fact, to be abolished?
I think we would be hoping that it will be phased out gradually, perhaps drop down to 10% rather than the 15% that it's at the moment. If it is totally abolished, it's certainly going to hit the first-time buyers, and those on limited budgets anyway, it's going to overstretch them.
Tony Blair and Gordon Brown are very keen on green taxes. They want it to be a green budget. That affects the car industry. So what about car businesses in Chester? Philip Jones has one.
Well, Diana, for my own particular franchise, things are pretty good, I'm pleased to say. But for the motor trade in general, things are far from good. Since the boom of 1989, things for the situation for the motor trade in Great Britain has been very, very poor indeed. And for the Northwest, and I must say it's nice for you to come here to look at things rather than the Southeast. For the Northwest, things will be very much affected if the motor trade is hit, particularly on company car tax and the environment issues, which are areas I feel have already been taken care of by the previous Chancellor.
Now, Barry Johnston, you're keeping your eye very closely on green issues and what Tony Blair and Gordon Brown decide. What do you think could be sustained here in Chester?
Well, different people want different things here. There really is no consensus. Some people want to hit cars hard because the city centre here suffers from bad air pollution. Asthma is very, very high here. So if taxing business car parks, I think, would be a good idea. Getting rid of car tax altogether and loading it onto the price of fuel might be another idea, so the marginal cost of running a car per mile goes up, might be a good idea. But I'm also really keen to see VAT on fuel stay as it is, and extra money put into helping the lowest 30% of people in terms of income. But the other problem with VAT on fuel is I pay 8% VAT on my fuel, 17.5% to save energy for solar panels or whatever. Now that has got to be equalised or even reduced.
Nigel Bruce, you're from Chester Chamber of Commerce. So sum up Chester, do you think, for the country?
Well, it's a curious amalgam here, Diana, because we've got some very successful industries who've moved in recently, and especially the financial services, but we have a lot of other industry which is still struggling, and people are very concerned about the future. Short-termism, I'm afraid, is still prevalent.
So don't rock the boat, Gordon Brown. That's the message from Chester. Thank you very much indeed. David.
Thanks, Diana. Very abstemious you are in Chester with just glasses of mineral water, rather like the Chancellor of the Exchequer. I at least expect a cup of tea there. Anyway, cheers, yes. We'll be back with you later on. Now, we heard a moment ago from Jeremy Vine up in Stoke-on-Trent about the sorts of things the Chancellor could do. Let's now have a look at the bigger picture, the economic picture, and the room he's got to do things, so-called room to manoeuvre, it's always talked about, but how he can bear down on the economy as a whole, Jeremy. Should we look at that?
Yes, let's do that, David. Let's look at some of the statistics that will jump out at Gordon Brown as he studies his balance sheet, starting with one of the all-important ones for any Labour government, indeed any government, unemployment. At 92, very high, coming down from 3 million, 2.9 million, putting the recession behind us. These are the forecasts from Goldman Sachs, 97, 1.6 million, 1998, 1.4 million. Key question about that figure is, are there enough skilled workers in there to fill jobs in new firms? If there aren't, then new firms have to poach existing workers by offering higher wages, and that feeds inflation. Let us take a look at the inflation figures as they have been on the desk of Gordon Brown, perhaps as he studied them in the run-up to his budget. Moving around a lot on this graph, fairly dramatic graph here, within a narrow range, 4.7 in 92, 2.4 in 97, 2.7% in 98. That's the forecast from Goldman Sachs. Bear in mind, this is well within Gordon Brown's target, which is plus or minus 1% of 2.5%. But it is the underlying rate, and it does perhaps mask inflationary pressures in the economy, which he will have been acutely concerned with as he's put his budget together. Other figures he will have been acutely concerned with, of course, are the PSBR, the public sector borrowing requirement, the amount the government has to borrow to finance its spending plans year after year. This is our forecast again from Goldman Sachs, 23 billion, the actual figure for 1996-97, the year just passed. And then you can see government borrowing being squeezed down. They're having to borrow less and less year on year until it's almost been rubbed out just after the turn of the millennium. £2 billion only borrowing there. Now, in these 2 years, of course, you must remember the pennies from heaven, the windfall tax that the Chancellor's going to raise with his tax on privatised utilities. That would seem to reduce the PSBR figures down to these amounts here. But in fact, actually, you would tend to take the windfall tax away because we know where it's going. It's going to the young and the long-term unemployed. So we'll put the forecasts back where they were before. Now, speaking of the windfall tax, here's a man who has been smiling through gritted teeth ever since he heard those two words for the first time. His name is Chris Mellor. He's the Financial Director of Anglian Water PLC. Mr. Mellor has joined us, I'm pleased to say, today. They're one of the utilities whose reserves will be pumped for those excess profits. And these are the three pipelines that run from Anglian Water's accounts. We've chosen them because the way the tax is levied, in Anglian's case, will give us a clear indication of what happens to utilities across the nation. So there are three separate pipelines here running from the Anglian accounts, and the question is, which of these pipes will they open? Tap number one, the Chancellor could look at. It's called profits. He could turn tap number one, turn on the water there. Mr. Mellor, what does it mean if he attacks the tap marked profits?
Well, this would be a percentage of our profits, and assuming the pundits have got it right, and the total tax is, say, 5 billion, and the net is fairly widely drawn, then depending on whether we take 1 year's profits or, say, 5 years together, this could produce a windfall tax for Anglian of, say, 100 to 150 million.
Now, the second tap, pipeline number two, he could open that. It's marked sales. What does it mean if he opens that?
Well, this would be a percentage of our sales or turnover. That's the total amount of bills our customers pay us. This would be likely to produce a slightly smaller range, say 50 to 100 million.
Third pipeline comes to a tap marked shares. The Chancellor could turn that tap on. There it goes now. What would that mean?
Well, this is more complicated. This would measure the total returns our shareholders have received, that is, dividends plus share price appreciation, compared, say, to the stock market average. And that's, depending, again, where you draw the line, that could produce a number in a range, say, 100 to 200 million.
So worst case scenario for you?
Probably, yes. Would be the shares method, the third one there.
Thank you very much indeed. We've got an analyst forecast which says you could pay between £50 million if it goes well for you today, up to £400 million if you have a nightmare scenario today. So we'll be watching carefully what happens to you. David, as you can see, the stakes are very high for these privatised utilities. We'll come back to Mr. Mellor when he knows the method by which the tax is being charged.
Thank you, Jeremy. Now let's go to one of the United Kingdom's key financial centres, Edinburgh, the capital of Scotland, and join John Sopel. John.
Good afternoon and welcome to Edinburgh. A slightly overcast day, but the rain has held off, and I'm joined by a range of experts, framed as they are in the shadow of Edinburgh Castle. Bill McCall, you're the UK fund manager and the director in Edinburgh of Tilney Company. Now, what has been happening with the markets? Can you explain this to me? Because we saw it go up 132 points yesterday, up 60 this morning, down again, it came crashing down afterwards. What's it all about?
Well, I won't bore you with the technicalities, John. I think it's better to travel than arrive, really, is a quaint Scottish expression. We've arrived today, and it was quoted in the Financial Times this morning. A government spokesman said it's bonkers, and I'm afraid we would tend to agree with that. But I think three key messages. Firstly, this government have moved very quickly to earn the respect and trust of the city. They first of all adopted some conservative policy with the telecom situation. Secondly, a new regulatory body to come into flow, and then the independence for the Bank of England. So there's been a lot of smart moves in that very initial 4-week period just to get the city on side.
And in the announcements that we're going to get this afternoon, do you expect the same care to be made in the way that they target who they're going to help, who they're going to hit?
Well, I think target's the key word. We saw in the Gulf War smart bombs. I suspect we may see some smart taxes, in that they can pinpoint with pinpoint accuracy now target specific areas of the economy without upsetting other parts. So the old blunt instrument of interest rates has gone to the Bank of England. Let's say the fine detail now remains with the Chancellor.
Middleton, first Labour budget in 18 years. You must be rather excited, aren't you?
Very much so, and there is a big expectation from this budget. We realise that Gordon Brown is not going to be able to remove in one fell swoop all the inequalities created over 18 years of Tory government, but we have an expectation that this budget will give us jobs. It will address the issue of low pay, and it will in fact address the issue of the public services.
You say address the issue of low pay. Are you expecting more money him to announce the minimum wage today?
No, I wouldn't expect that. What I do expect, however, is that if there is a lowering of the income tax to 10p, then we see that as a part of the strategy that will ultimately culminate in the minimum wage.
Stuart McNabb, you're a senior corporate tax advisor at Pricewaterhouse. We heard Anne there talking from the union perspective on welfare into work. How will your clients, the utilities, regard today's windfall tax?
Well, I think the utilities obviously are looking forward to getting details of how much is going to be raised, but more importantly, how it's going to be raised by the Chancellor. There's a whole lot of technical areas in terms of how much the Chancellor is going to be able to raise through the windfall levy. So I think we're looking forward to finally getting some details of how much and how it's going to be raised.
And are you expecting it to be on the higher end of the prediction?
I think we're expecting to somewhere around about 5 billion in total, but where the important issue really is when you look at how it's going to be raised, because that will have an impact on how that 5 billion is spread out.
Just a quick other thought from you before we move on. Do you look forward to budgets like this, or is it a sense of trepidation? It's a Labour government, we don't really like it?
No, I mean this particular budget was generating quite a lot of excitement. I mean, if half the rumoured measures come true, there's going to be a lot of extra work generated out of it. So it's the first Labour budget for 20 years.
Good day for accountants. Marilyn Orchester, let me come to you finally. What are the small business people, because you chair the chairman of the Small Business Bureau, what are you hoping for?
Well, there's more small businesses now, a lot more than there were 18 years ago, and small businesses are going to be the backbone of the economy. And the Labour government has successfully wooed a lot of small business voters over to their side, so we'll be very interested to see if they really understand how small businesses work and do give us some of the breaks that we need in order to be able to increase our numbers and employed and increase our profits and make the country more successful.
OK, all of you for the moment, thank you very much. Those are the hopes, those are the predictions. We'll see if they're right in a minute. David.
John, thank you very much. In Edinburgh, we'll be going back up there and having another look at the castle later on, and all the experts up there. Now, Bridget Rose, will you advise Kenneth Clarke, or you were one of the wise people who advised Kenneth Clarke on what you thought the economy was going to do? Your name's mentioned in the Red Book as thinking this and thinking that. What do you think now that he's abolished the wise people? If you were there, what would you be saying to him about what room he's got?
I think that I would be saying that what he's got to do is to take some of the sort of temperature that is actually building up, particularly on the consumer side of the economy. We've got these enormous windfall gains, not to the utility companies, but actually to the consumers as much as anything.
Don't we need, I mean, we've been in a terrible recession. We've been in a terrible recession. We've got over 1 million people unemployed. Don't we need people to spend money? Isn't it I mean, in the election, we're saying the feel-good factor hasn't come through. This is the feel-good factor.
Well, I think we did get the feel-good factor. Look how cheerful everybody was on May the 2nd. Yeah, you need people.
That's a different kind of, that's a political
Clearly, people need to spend, and if there isn't any spending in the economy, then we won't get any growth. That's true. But on the other hand, if it gets too far out of control, in the sense that spending starts to accelerate too much, then what happens is that, for one thing, you just begin to suck in exports, and that's particularly a problem when sterling is so high and exporters are having a problem. And prices, the pressure on prices begins to get more and more serious. And under those circumstances, then it behoves a cautious Chancellor, and Gordon Brown has told us that he is a cautious Chancellor, not to just to cool it off a bit.
But
that's
don't
not
you
to say
sometimes
that we need to push everybody back into
But don't you
recession.
sometimes feel pity the poor consumer? Because I remember a year or two ago, everybody saying, why aren't people spending their money? What's the matter? There is money there to spend. They should be spending it, then we'll be out of recession. The moment they start spending it, along comes the Chancellor, according to you if he does, and clobbers them for tax one way or another because they're overspending.
I know, it's the problem of being consumers being the backbone of any particular economy. Consumer spending, whatever happens to it, is so big in relation to everything else that small changes make big differences one way or another to the rest of the economy.
Okay.
Whereas you can have a massive investment boom, for example, in relative terms, and well, apart from everybody would be extremely grateful for a massive investment boom, that's actually what we need, but nonetheless it's not going to make the same sort of scale of difference to the economy overall as anything that consumers do. Okay. So it's just a question, it's a question of balance, like all things.
Peter J., what do you think he should be thinking of doing?
I think that he's going to be overridingly concerned, as he actually says, with the long term. And I think it's very important not to underestimate the importance, at least in his mind, of the change that he made in the first few days that he was in office when he delegated to the Bank of England, this new Monetary Policy Committee, responsibility for setting interest rates. Because that's not just responsibility for setting interest rates, that is responsibility for the whole short-term management of the economy, the very things that you've been talking to Bridget about just now, and I have some sympathy with the questions you were raising about things that were said 2 years ago and what is being said now. That is now clearly and ambiguously the responsibility of the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee. They have to achieve the inflation target which the Chancellor has set. He is not going to be trying to steer the economy in that short-term way in the budget. He is going to be trying to achieve, he may fail, but he's going to be trying to achieve longer-term growth, and the way he thinks he will achieve that is by having very responsible, very conservative, very conventional budgetary policy balance between spending and income as defined, taking account of investment and Maastricht criteria and all the rest of it, in the belief that that is the way to bring down long-term interest rates, because the markets will then have confidence in the policies of the government, and that lower long-term interest rates mean that business is more likely to invest, and more investment will lead to more growth and more jobs. That is his philosophy. It may be right, it may be wrong, that's what he's thinking about. Therefore, it will be quite wrong in interpreting what he's trying to do to be focusing on whether or not there is in the short term a boom or not a boom, or a boom in the city but not outside the city, or a boom in Islington but not in Newcastle. That problem is now the Bank of England's problem, and that's not what the Chancellor will be tackling in the changes which he makes. He's still got the problem that the budgetary situation he's inherited is unbalanced. The deficit is too large in the present year and in the next year, 98-99. Beyond that, if Ken Clarke's figures were correct, it is, if anything, too orthodox, too conservative. There's almost too much surplus. He can afford to relax. But there are doubts about whether the figures, as you go out beyond next year into the future, can really be believed in.
Okay, Peter, thanks very much. Well, now, let's go back up to Stoke-on-Trent and meet some of these consumers, the people who are going to be at the end of the day discovering whether they've got more money or less money or whatever, and will have to make decisions about spending. We have a wide range of families with Jeremy Vine in Stoke-on-Trent. Jeremy.
Thank you. Yes, here in the shop window we can have a look at our family fortunes. We've been joined by people, as you say, David, from all across the Midlands. And we can look at the way that this budget may affect residents of our computerised Stirling Street, into which we've placed them individually. So we'll go to our first resident now. First of all, in the council flats at one end, this is Jo Bailey. This is her son, Jordan. She's an unemployed single parent. And Jo, I suppose the key for you is that the Chancellor says the word childcare this afternoon.
I'd like to see free childcare for all people on the lowest incomes, and a lot more after-school clubs, so that single parents can go back to work.
You've been trying to find a job, but at the moment it's just not possible to juggle things.
Not with the childcare that's available at the moment now. No, absolutely not.
Our next resident also has no job, is just a few yards down the road from Jo Bailey. This is Jeremy Wilkes here, who's unemployed, been unemployed for a couple of years. You're 20 years old, Jeremy, and you're looking for work. In a sense, the whole budget's about you, isn't it? It's about what the Chancellor calls welfare to work. Do you think it's going to end up putting you in a job?
I hope so, yes.
What sort of job do you think you might get out of it?
Who knows? Whatever's available, to be honest.
Do you sense a situation coming where you're told that if you don't work, you'll lose your benefit?
Yes.
And under those circumstances, what would you do?
Well, you'd have to take the job, because there's no way you could afford to live on less benefits than you get now.
This scheme sounds successful to you, welfare to work?
Hopefully it'll be better than the last lot.
But at the moment, things are pretty tough for you?
Yeah, very.
Our next residents are not earning anymore. They're a pensioner couple just down the road here. That's Harry and Joan Blurton. On £9,000 a year, Harry was a traffic warden until he hurt his back, so he's on pension plus disability allowance. Labour have said they'll do a lot for pensioners, but what are you expecting, Harry?
Well, I should like to see the pensioners given a little bit more money to live on, plus the road fund licence not to go up.
Because you drive a car, don't you?
Because I drive a car, and without the car I'm stuck. I shouldn't be able to get about. So I'd like to see petrol come down as well.
When they've talked about what they're going to do for pensioners, they've always talked about that thing we mentioned earlier, VAT on domestic fuel cut. Will that put us enough money your way, a comfortable amount?
Well, it won't give us enough, but it will be a little help.
Let's move a few yards further down the street and come to our first earning couple here, Fabian and Debbie Thomas. Fabian runs a pub on £6,000 a year, which includes family credit. They've got 3 children. Fabian, the pub's crucial to you, isn't it? Now, what can the Chancellor do to help you there?
Lower VAT, lower income tax, and put tax on duty-free.
Are you, at the moment, struggling?
Very much so.
Is that because people are going abroad to buy their drinks and so on? Taking business away from you?
I'd say that was a factor.
He may help you out with his 10p tax band if that comes in. Are you feeling enthusiastic about that?
Pretty optimistic at the moment.
Okay. Our next residents are on average earnings now, and just in this rather comfortable-looking cul-de-sac here, we find the Mitchell family, Colin and Val. Mitchell, £20,000 a year. Corinne, their daughter, is trained as a nurse, but couldn't get a job when she finished her training, so she's now a student. Colin and Val. Val, I know you voted Labour. What would you like your first Labour budget to do?
I'd like to see an increase in tax so that more money is spent on education and health. So I want jobs for the future. And in the long term, we'll all be better off if if more money is spent on education and health.
Of course, one of the things that Mr. Brown has said is that he's sticking to the existing spending levels for departments. Does that
Well, he
worry you a
promised
bit?
that. Well, no, I mean, I knew what he was going to do. I'm still old Labour.
You're hoping that he might even make you worse off today to fund those services?
That would make me happy, yes.
Just across the street here, Peter Morby and Sandra, his wife. Peter, on twice as much, £40,000 a year, runs a sewing machine business. Peter, I know you have 3 vehicles, 2 vans and a car. They're obvious targets for Mr. Brown, aren't they?
I feel very vulnerable today with what may happen in the budget today, yes. I feel very vulnerable.
Our last couple in the street are Stan and Helen Thatcher. They just live just beyond the privatised utility there in this big house. They're on £100,000 a year. They have investments as well and another home which you're about to sell. So you are very vulnerable today. Are you feeling that you're going to pay a lot more at the end of the day?
Forgetting for the moment Labour's new image, and notwithstanding past Labour chancellors, taxes will go up across the spectrum, really. What I'm concerned about mainly, of course, is capital gains tax, corporation tax increases, or indeed dividend tax changes. And as I've said before, whether others will catch a cold, others will catch pneumonia.
Those are our residents then of our graphicised Stirling Street. We'll come back to them when the Chancellor's spoken to find out what they think about whether they're better or worse off. David.
Thanks, Jeremy. Now, Jill Knott, we've talked about the consumer and spending power and all that. What about the area of savings and pensions today? What should people be looking out for? And what do you think might change?
Well, what I'm concerned about is that the Chancellor shouldn't do anything to discourage saving. If he is indeed a long-term Chancellor, as we've been speculating, he's really got to be looking to encourage people to continue to invest. And the rumours we've heard about the potential reduction in ACT are quite worrying because of the impact they could have on pension plans and particularly on people's savings in PEPs. So what I'd like to see the Chancellor do is to make strong moves towards his individual savings account that Labour talked about in their manifesto, and some simplification of the savings schedule to encourage people to make provision for their old age, because we all know that unless a substantial proportion of the population make better provision for their old age, the economy is going to struggle to pay adequately for their provision.
Without going into the details, if he hoists up the ACT flag and makes changes in it, it means that pension funds won't get quite as much money as before out of their investments, and therefore people who have their pensions funded that way may find their pensions fall a bit.
Yes, we don't know what reaction companies will have to that. I mean, the pension funds will lean heavily on companies.
Well, companies all have pension funds too, so it's circular.
Yeah, it's absolutely circular. Sitting around a boardroom table, companies will be faced with having to put more money into their own pension funds. So they may, strangely, have less to invest. So the knock-on effect of a reduction in ACT could be very serious.
Good. Well, we'll look at that. And Robin, hopefully, just before we go to the House of Commons, this row about the leak, is there anything in it? I mean, this is the last budget. Look at this. This is the Daily Mirror at the last budget. It had the entire, I don't know if the camera can see it, had the entire budget in full detail leaked to the Mirror. And this seems a paltry little thing that they're complaining about.
That's a
today.
real leak, David. This is a phony leak. This isn't really a leak at all. It's no more a leak than if somebody had confirmed that the windfall tax was going to be in the budget. The Labour Party have been talking about the abolition of tax relief on private medical insurance for the elderly for a long, long time. Liberal Democrats produced their alternative budget yesterday. They said in the course of it, Labour's policy is to abolish tax relief on private medical insurance to help pay for their VAT on fuel cut to 5%.
And Blair said the same himself.
By it.
Yeah.
But of course we got the Tories are keen to show that they're in the business of effective opposition. They've had a bit of a go at the government over Ron Davis and whether Labour MPs are allowed to speak out of turn on devolution. Now they're trying to show they can do it on the budget too.
OK, well, we'll see how that goes. Peter Lilly is expected to speak after Prime Minister's questions, which is about to begin in the House of Commons. Tony Blair is already there. So let's go over to Carolyn Quinn in the House.
And William Hague's in his place as well for the half-hour question session, as is the former Tory leader, John Major. He's sitting 2 rows from the back. It's a big day for Mr Hague. He'll be replying as well later to the budget statement. Questions will start, as usual, with a request for details about the Prime Minister's engagements. Lynn Jones, a Labour MP, asking the first question.
Madam Speaker, this morning we had a Cabinet meeting to discuss the budget. I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. And in between, I'm delighted to say I was able to watch Mr Tim Henman win magnificently at tennis.
Does my right honourable friend agree with the CBI, Chambers of Commerce, a whole string of economists, and even the Bank of England, that tax increases and not rises in interest rates are what are needed if we are to convert the threatened consumer boom into sustained growth in the productive economy? And wouldn't changes, fair changes in taxation in a generally upwards direction, be welcomed by the public who want to see more spent on health and education?
Well, Madam Speaker, my honourable friend will have to wait for the Chancellor's statement a little bit later, but of course she is right to draw attention to the appalling state of the public finances left us by the last government.
Mr William Hague.
Will the Prime Minister tell the House who gave authority to the Treasury Press Office to confirm certain details of the budget in advance of its presentation to Parliament?
Madam Speaker, I have to say to the right honourable gentleman that as far as I'm aware, all Treasury officials have done is confirm that what we said that we would do before the election, we will indeed do. Now, this may be a novel proposition for the Conservative Party, but it isn't for us.
Mr Hague.
Well, is the Prime Minister aware? Is the Prime Minister aware that on top of this morning's disclosure by the Treasury, the Financial Times quotes a senior member of the government as confirming that changes to dividend tax credits will be included in the budget, something which was not the previously stated policy of the Labour Party or in their election manifesto? Is he aware that Hugh Dalton, the Labour Chancellor who resigned over a budget leak,
That was in 1947.
and admittedly it was old Labour and you could trust them then, is he aware that he said one must always own up? Who is going to own up for that particular leak? Is he going to mount an investigation into that leak? And in common with previous practice into budget leaks, will it be a police investigation?
I mean, Madam Speaker, I really never have heard anything quite so absurd as this. As my honourable friend says, why not hold a referendum?
A reference to William Hague's call last week for a referendum on the Amsterdam summit.
I'd simply like to say to the right honourable gentleman, at least with this government, we didn't have the whole of the budget leaked.
As happened last year.
Order. Mr Hague.
It is all very well, Madam Speaker, for the Prime Minister to make light of the leaking of budget details which affect billions of pounds on the markets and affect the savings of millions of people. But is he not aware that he should mount an investigation into such leaks And if he does mount such an investigation, will he make a better job of it than last week's investigation into the behaviour of the Welsh Secretary? When he gave us his assurance last week that an investigation had been carried out to his satisfaction, did he know that in the course of that investigation, the honourable member for Blaenau Gwent, who made the allegations, had never been contacted?
That's Klaus Smith.
I mean, Madam Speaker, my advice to the right honourable gentleman is to quit whilst it... My advice to him is to quit whilst he's behind. Now, and as for going back over last week's question time, I think he should stop flogging a dead horse.
Mr. Hague?
My advice to the Prime Minister, Madam Speaker, is to answer the questions he is paid to answer. And my advice to the Prime Minister is that when there is incompetence in the Treasury, or when there are unauthorised budget details leaked, the buck stops there with the First Lord of the Treasury. Is he not worried even a little that after his personal assurances to the House last week, one of his own MPs said afterwards, what the Prime Minister, I am sad to say, said is wrong? Will he agree that if and when these matters are properly investigated, as they should be, the rules of conduct he so publicly sets for others must apply to the Labour Party, the government and himself?
This follows allegations from Klaus Smith that he was bullied by Ron Davis, the Welsh Secretary.
He will have to wait for the Chancellor's statement in a moment. What I can assure him of is this, that we set out in the manifesto some very, very clear promises, and we will maintain those promises. We will keep to those promises, and one of the great differences that people will see between this side and that is that when we make promises, we keep them.
Mr. Bill Rammell?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In the 9 weeks since I was elected to this House, I have received literally hundreds of letters from my constituents in Harlow on a wide range of issues. But I have yet to receive a single one demanding a referendum on the outcome of the Amsterdam summit. Would the Prime Minister therefore agree with me, and indeed it seems the Right Honourable Member for Rushcliffe, that there is no need for such referendums and that they shouldn't come forward?
I thank my honourable friend, and I mean, I'm rather surprised the right honourable gentleman didn't raise this as his big point at Prime Minister's questions. But I have to say, apparently the reason why some say there should be a referendum is because of an extension of qualified majority voting. Well, I can tell you, Madam Speaker, I've looked carefully at the Single European Act and at the Maastricht Treaty. There were vastly greater extensions of qualified majority voting in both of those treaties, and not one word about a referendum did we ever hear from the Conservative Party. But then they are consistent, at least, in their inconsistency.
Mr. Paul Tyler?
Madam Speaker, in light of the outcome of the Aitken affair,
Tyler, I'm sorry.
Speaker, in light of the outcome of the Aitken affair, can the Prime Minister confirm that he is examining the role of the Cabinet Secretary, and indeed the implications for the reputation of impartiality of the civil service, from the very invidious role in which the Cabinet Secretary was put, apparently, as a result of government activity?
Well, Madam Speaker, I can't confirm that to the honourable gentleman. What I can say to him is that, of course, any matter that is alleged will be properly investigated and looked at, but a lot of these things are presently in the hands of the various authorities that should look at them, and it wouldn't be right for me to comment on them, certainly at this stage.
Colin Pickthall.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My right honourable friend will understand the concern of those who live in the areas bordering the northern parts of the Irish Sea, the revelation of the dumping, the secret dumping of radioactive material into the Beaufort Dyke. Whilst commending my honourable friend, the member for Perry Barr, for the speed in which he's made public the information about this, would my honourable friend assure the House that such secret dumping is not happening now, cannot happen in the future, and will he also agree that this is a fine example supporting the need for open government in the field of information?
Well, Madam Speaker, I can confirm to my honourable friend that contrary to assurances that were given in good faith by indeed Conservative and Labour governments, there was apparently some radioactive material dumped at Beaufort Dyke during the 1950s. Our understanding and my advice is that this was of a very small nature indeed, and that it poses no risk either to human health or to the environment. But we have received further information about this, and we will, as that information becomes available, we will make it public, because we are concerned to make sure that anything that is alleged is brought out into the open so that people can know exactly what happened.
Sir Sidney Chapman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In the impending so-called anti-sleaze bill, could the Prime Minister inform the House, as a matter of open government, whether there will be a provision in it which would make it an offence for a Member of Parliament to induce another Member of Parliament to give up his seat in return for a peerage?
Madam Speaker,
There's been some allegations or suggestions that Ron Davis may have asked Ray Powell to do that.
That in contradistinction to the last government, we shall uphold the highest standards in public life.
Mr. Roger Berry.
Speaker, will my right honourable friend acknowledge the warm welcome given by disabled people to the government's pledge to introduce comprehensive and enforceable civil rights legislation, not least by the 1,000 or so people who lobbied Parliament yesterday? And will he tell the House what action is being taken to implement that manifesto commitment?
Well, Madam Speaker, first of all, can I congratulate my honourable friend for all the work that he has done in the field of disability, and I know he has the Disability Rights Commission bill that we are presently looking at ourselves, and I can assure them that the discussions that we are having with the Ministers for Employment and the disability organisations are still continuing, and I'm sure that they will result in a fulfilment of the manifesto pledge that we gave. And I think that it is worth pointing out that in the field of disability, those advances that have been made have always been criticised at the time and have always ended up inuring to the benefit of the vast majority of people in the country, disabled or not.
Mr. Paddy Ashdown.
Speaker, the Prime Minister earlier on told us that when he made promises, he'd keep them. At the last election, he made two promises, one that they would cut taxes, and two that they'd improve public services. Does he believe he can keep both?
Madam Speaker, I suggest that the right honourable gentleman waits for the budget statement that is about to be made.
Mr. Clive. Oh, sorry, Mr. Ashdown.
Let me be a bit more specific. One of the Prime Minister's key pledges, I think they were called sacred pledges, was to cut class sizes. But at the same time, the government is now forcing local authorities to continue to sack teachers. How is it possible to cut class sizes and kick out teachers?
Madam Speaker, as the right honourable gentleman knows, we are committed to cutting class sizes for 5-, 6- and 7-year-olds to 30 or under. We're committed to doing that, and we will do it. That is to be funded by phasing out the assisted places scheme. That bill has actually on its way through the House of Commons now, and we said that we would do this, and we will actually do it. And if we don't do it, then he can come back and tackle us upon it.
Mr. Clive Soley.
Following the successful transfer of sovereignty in Hong Kong, does the Prime Minister agree with me that we have a very real opportunity now, felt over the period of years that the Anglo-Chinese agreement continues, not only to exercise our rights and duties in respect of the freedoms of the people of Hong Kong, but also to build up a much more productive and positive relationship with the people and government of China, where there can be a very real two-way exchange of benefit to both great countries?
Madam Speaker, I would agree with my honourable friend. I think it is important to realise that the basis of a strong and stable relationship with China, which we want, is adherence to the joint declaration. That is the basis of the freedoms of the people in Hong Kong, and that is the basis that we will expect to be adhered to. And in particular, of course, it is important to put the elections that should be held within the year in the context of that joint declaration. Outside of that, it is also the case that through the joint liaison group between Britain and China that will exist up to the year 2000, and our continuing commitment for 50 years under the joint declaration, we will have a continuing interest in Hong Kong. And I believe that it is in the interests of Britain, of China, and the people of Hong Kong, one, that we make sure the joint declaration is kept to strictly, and we will, and secondly, that we build upon that a strong and good relationship with China for the future, and we will do that too.
Sir Peter Tapsell.
Does the Prime Minister understand
that his attempt to trivialise allegations of a budget leak can only be damaging to his own reputation, particularly in view of his many statements that he was going to aim, as we all hope he will succeed in doing so, to the maintenance of the highest possible standards in public life. Is he aware that these alleged statements by ministers, which were circulating as rumours throughout the city the whole of yesterday, resulted in the largest rise in the FT index on the stock exchange for 5 years, and that this is a very serious matter? Well, for honourable gentlemen opposite, who are always attacking fat cats, it's rather extraordinary they should be so much in favour of them when they're getting their cream from Labour ministerial leaks.
Madam Speaker, to my certain knowledge, I mean, I've sat through 14 budgets of previous Conservative governments. Some of my honourable friends have sat through 18. There is budget speculation every year. It happens the whole time. It happened under the last Conservative government. I don't doubt it will happen forever. That is simply a matter of the way it goes. But as for the leaks of which the Conservative opposition are complaining of today, those are things that we said that we would do in our manifesto and intend doing.
Sir John Healey.
Madam Speaker, is the Prime Minister aware that the legacy of the last government has left the Rotherham area with the highest unemployment anywhere in the Yorkshire and Humberside region, and that nearly 1 in 3 of our unemployed are under 25? Can he therefore spell out what guarantees he can give the young people in Rotherham and the Dearne that their job prospects will in fact improve under the current government?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that, Madam Speaker. No doubt if I mention the windfall tax, I'll be accused of leaking the budget. But, I mean, there is indeed going to be the measure that we set out clearly in our election manifesto, and the purpose of that is to give those young people in my honourable friend's area, in my constituency, in many other parts of the country, those young people that don't have hope and opportunity or the chance to get a job or decent skills at the moment, they will get that chance, and they will get it for them because it's right that they get the chance to do well, and they will get it for the whole of the country because the whole country benefits from a fairer and more decent, more civilised society.
Reverend Martin Smith.
Madam Speaker, would the Prime Minister agree with me that threats from provisional IRA or loyalist Protestant volunteer forces are neither wanted nor helpful at this time? But would he also agree that there is something wrong where civil servants are aware that aid memoir response had come from Sinn Féin, but the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland apparently was not informed? Surely, in open government, civil servants should be advising ministers accurately.
Well, Madam Speaker, I'm not entirely sure I understood one part of the honourable gentleman's question, and forgive me if I didn't, and I would write to him if there's any misunderstanding. But the aid memoir was passed by the government to Sinn Féin in circumstances that I explained last week. But I entirely agree with them about the case against threats or intimidation in this process, and we will resist them. And we will resist them now, and if there ever is the set of circumstances that comes about in which there are all-inclusive talks, we will resist them then as well. What we want to see is a lasting political settlement, but the only people who have got the right to play any part in that are those that are giving up violence, not those that are following it.
Mr. Jim Cunningham.
Will my right honourable friend agree with me that when crime is committed in the community, we all become victims of crime, and therefore can my honourable friend say what the government intends to do to protect the victims of crime?
I can say, Madam Speaker, to my honourable friend that the Home Secretary will tomorrow announce a series of measures that will improve the treatment of victims within our court system. In particular, they will try to deal with the issue of intimidation of victims and witnesses, which is a very, very serious problem. And I can assure my honourable friend that this is something that has been raised with us continually, and we are going to act upon it.
David Wigley.
Is the Prime Minister aware that in Wales, and no doubt elsewhere, there are health trusts and health authorities that are teetering on the verge of bankruptcy because of the lack of funds, with nurses being sacked, beds being closed, and commitments to community hospitals being done away with because of the underfunding arising from the last government? Will he give an assurance that his government will provide adequate resources to ensure that no one in the coming winter goes without a bed in hospital if they need it?
Madam Speaker, we will do our very best to ensure that that happens. I have to say to the honourable gentleman two things. First, that I think it is important that any money that we are spending on the National Health Service actually goes into patient care, which is why we are committed to ending the Conservative internal market and making sure that that money goes to patients rather than to bureaucrats and administrators. And secondly, it is extremely important that we take all the steps necessary to make sure that the National Health Service is there and available for people on the basis of need, not ability to pay. And I can assure him that those two principles will underwrite everything that we do.
Mr. Patricia Hewitt.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree, without, of course, tempting him into any budget leaks, that millions of families who have been struggling to pay the more than 20 tax rises imposed upon them by the previous government will be hoping in this afternoon's budget for a cut in the rate of VAT on fuel and for a commitment to reduce and not to raise tax rates for ordinary working families?
Madam Speaker, I can certainly say to my honourable friend, without in any way entering into budget discussions, that we will adhere to our promises. And those promises include the cut of VAT on fuel, because when the last government introduced that, that caused enormous distress to ordinary families throughout the country, and in particular to pensioners, who ended up bearing the brunt of it.
To David Willis.
Can the Prime Minister confirm that he supports the principle of independent taxation of husband and wife, and that it would be inconceivable to go back to the days when the incomes of husbands and wives were taxed jointly? And will he therefore assure the House that nothing in the government's review of integrating tax and benefits will undermine that principle?
Madam Speaker, as I have said to other honourable members, I'm not getting tempted into anything that might happen later on this afternoon, but I have to say to him that we have set out our principles in relation to taxation. We set them out very clearly in our own manifesto, and we will keep to them.
Robin Corbett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Can the Prime Minister confirm that his government attaches high importance to giving every possible assistance to helping the two separate communities to reach agreement on a federal bizonal solution to what is unhappily known for the last 25 years as a Cyprus problem?
Yes, Madam Speaker, I can confirm we remain committed to that. Of course, we will have the European Union presidency in the first part of next year, and as I indicated to the House a week ago, we are committed to using the presidency in order to find the solution, the long-term solution to the problem of Cyprus that everybody wishes to see.
To David Rendell.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Given that the money from the cancellation of the assisted places scheme cannot become available to the government for at least another year, and given that there are many local education authorities that are already threatening to sack a number of teachers this year, for example, Labour-run Bury threatening to sack 167, can the Prime Minister admit that at the very least teacher-pupil ratios will continue to get worse and the number of primary school children in classes of more than 30 will continue to grow, at least for another year?
Madam Speaker, what I can confirm to the honourable gentleman is this, that there are, of course, tremendous problems that have been left to us. We have to deal with those problems as we can, making progress in the way that we are able to, given the difficulties of public finances and all the rest of it that we have inherited. And I say this to him, in this area as in others, what people in the country expect us to do is to make progress as we're able. And of course, if we have the support of all parts of this House to get through the measures that we need in order to get rid of the assisted places scheme and put in place the funding of lower class sizes, we will be able to make swifter progress. But we will do all that we can consistent with the proper management of the nation's finances. And if I may say to him, that is the difference between government and opposition.
Mr. Brian Donohoe.
12, Madam Speaker. Number 12, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, I have to say
asking when the Prime Minister expects to visit Ayrshire.
I have done so many times in the past, and I've no doubt I will do so again.
Donohoe.
That's a great shame, Madam Speaker, because, of course, Ayrshire is such a beautiful county that he doesn't know what he's missing. However, I'm sure that we will be able to entice him to the wonderful Ayrshire coast, the Clyde coast, in the not-too-distant future. However, in a more serious note, if the Prime Minister were to come to Ayrshire, one of the things that you would learn is that there's a tremendously high level of drug taking. Indeed, the local health board have just produced estimates that suggest that some 30,000 people have at some point taken drugs, knowing of the commitment of the Prime Minister that he made before the general election to set up a task force. I just wonder what progress has been made by him and by his right honourable friend, the Home Secretary.
Well, Madam Speaker, I can say to my honourable friend that the proposal that we made during the course of the election, that we would appoint one person, the so-called drug czar, in charge of all aspects of our policy in relation to this, will be done shortly. And I would also say to him that our concern to move quickly on this is not merely because of the effects that he has just mentioned in relation to his own constituency and others. It is because of the absolute hard, overwhelming evidence of the link between drug abuse and crime. And that is why we are going to take measures, not merely to crack down on drug abuse and those taking drugs and those peddling drugs, but also tackle some of the underlying causes of crime, such as youth unemployment.
Alistair Morgan.
In relation to Ayrshire, Madam Speaker, in particular the Ayrshire coast and the coast of the southwest of Scotland, can we expect an early statement on the problems of the munitions in Beaufort's Dyke, and in particular relation to the recent revelations about radioactive waste being dumped there?
Well, Madam Speaker, we have made available such evidence that exists. And indeed, if I may say to the honourable gentleman, the reason why this is a matter of discussion today at Prime Minister's questions is precisely because when it came to light that, contrary to previous assurances by governments made in good faith, that there had been the dumping of radioactive material, we disclosed it. Now, that is the very reason why this is a matter of discussion now. If there is further information, we will also disclose that. But I do repeat to him, because it's important that people are not unnecessarily alarmed, the advice that I have is that the dumping was of a very low level and that there is no risk to human health or the environment. If there should be any further evidence that comes to light or anything that may change or mitigate that statement, then we will make it available to the House.
Mr. John McCallion.
Madam Speaker, at the United Nations Summit on Social Development in 1995, it was agreed that each participating government should draw up a national plan for the eradication of poverty. Is my right honourable friend aware that the last Tory government subsequently ratted on that commitment, claiming that it wasn't needed in this country? And does he agree with me that that represents a calculated insult to the many millions of our fellow citizens who either live in poverty or on the margins of poverty? And will he now put that wrong right by committing this Labour government to drawing up such a national plan within an agreed timescale?
Well, Madam Speaker, I can say to my honourable friend that we certainly do regard the eradication of poverty as one of the aims and objectives of this government. That is the reason why, for example, we want a windfall tax to reduce youth unemployment. It is the reason why we believe in the cutting of VAT on fuel. It is also the reason why we are looking now at how the benefit system, and in particular the interrelationship between the tax and benefit system, can be improved so that we're giving people incentives to get back into work. It is also the reason why we're looking at across a whole range of issues in relation to the welfare state to see how we can make the provision fairer, more effective, more modern.
Mr. Tom King.
Is the Prime Minister aware that he has given a very clear
This is Gordon Brown taking his seat.
impression to the House today that he does not regard the leaks that have been discussed as very serious? Is he aware that there is prima facie evidence that a number of people have made a substantial amount of money relying on stories or attributions that have come from members of the government, or so it is alleged, and that this is a very serious matter indeed, since it goes to the very heart of the integrity of government? Could I ask him whether he has, in fact, taken advice, senior advice on this matter, which would, to many of us, seem to be a very serious issue indeed for his government?
Madam Speaker, I have to say to the right honourable gentleman, speculation about what is in the budget happens every single year, to my certain knowledge. Yes, it does. And indeed, if he wants to go back, as I have done, if he wants to go back and check last year's press cuttings from the Conservative budget, he will find it was all over the place about senior government and this source and that source. It is all the usual round of speculation. And I have to say to the Conservative Party, I believe they're tackling this issue because they're afraid of tackling the real issues.
Mr. Austin Mitchell. Mr. Austin Mitchell.
Not there, apparently.
Dennis Skinner.
Next question.
Is my right honourable friend aware that
as a result of the massive pit closure programme that took place over the course of the last 18 years in particular, and certainly the last few years, there isn't a single pit left in the whole of the Derbyshire coalfield, and that would apply to many other coalfields as well. Will he take into account the fact that there hasn't been any overheating of the economy in any of these coalfield areas? And when he is drawing up plans arising out of the budget or afterwards, will he bear in mind that whatever improvement takes place generally, there needs to be some kind of an industrial development plan for those coalfield areas where poverty and mass unemployment still reign supreme as a result of the last 18 years.
Well, Madam Speaker, I think my honourable friend is absolutely right in what he says. And that is why it is important, whatever the general state of the economy, that we take specific and targeted measures on unemployment that take account of the fact that for those areas that have engaged in huge industrial restructuring, there must be specific help for people there. It is also one of the reasons why we are committed to development agencies in the regions that can coordinate inward investment and the development of small and medium-sized businesses starting up and other businesses to come in to supplant those that have gone. And that type of specific targeted activity is a very, very important part of our economic and industrial policy.
Well, the budget should follow within the next 10 minutes or so. First, that private notice question from the Shadow Chancellor, Peter Lilly, into those alleged budget leaks. It's basically a request for a statement.
May I ask the Right Honourable Lady, the Leader of the House, a question of which I've given her private notice, whether she will move to set up a select committee to investigate advanced disclosures from the Chancellor of Exchequer's budget statement.
Order. There's no points of order if they come after private notice question. I want to hear the honourable gentleman has to say at this dispatch box. This House will come to order and hear exchanges. Mr. Lilly. I'm sorry.
Well, he's actually finished his question. It's answered by Anne Taylor, the Leader of the House, because it's an issue for the House of Commons. He's asked for a select committee to be set up.
No, we do not intend to establish such a committee. There is always speculation at the time of the budget about its contents. As the Right Honourable Gentleman, as a former junior Treasury Minister, should know, I have seen no evidence that details of the budget statement have been leaked. If the complaints are that we are sticking to manifesto commitments and election pledges, then as the Prime Minister made clear, we are happy to confirm that this is the case.
There are a number of Conservatives trying to ask questions.
I'm so sorry.
Peter Lilly.
Peter Lilly first, though.
That the Right Honourable Lady, recognising that she acts for the whole House rather than the government, would take this matter more seriously. Certainly more seriously than her Right Honourable friend, the Prime Minister, act on precedent and set up an inquiry. Does she not recognise that these are matters of the highest importance to the authority of this House and to the integrity of financial markets? And that's why a previous Labour Chancellor, who himself disclosed contents of his own budget before that budget, was required to resign, and same has happened to other Treasury Ministers also. The Right Honourable Lady says that this relates to matters which were in the Labour Party's manifesto. Neither of the issues disclosed before the budget today were in the Labour Party's manifesto. They are not a matter of speculation, but of disclosure of specific matters which will be in the budget. If she says it was a matter of which we should be all aware, why was it that when the Treasury revealed the details of the plans to abolish in this budget the tax relief for medical insurance for the elderly, the BBC thought that was news, CFAX thought that was news, the journalists who phoned me thought that was news, they did not think it was established policy, and they knew, unlike the Treasury, who said that it was in their manifesto, that it was not in the Labour Party manifesto. It had never been declared as policy and a possible content of this budget in this House, and it should not have been revealed, I would submit to her, to journalists,
before it was disclosed in the budget to this House. But whatever she says about that issue, surely she will agree that the second disclosure, which was in the front page of the Financial Times today by their respected political correspondent, whom I'm sure she will respect also, said, and I quote, a senior member of the government said about the plans to abolish credits for ACT and to take billions of pounds out of pension funds. The markets are bonkers. We are pressing ahead with these plans. That is clearly a disclosure of a very price-sensitive matter. Can she confirm, and would she not agree it is necessary to inquire into, the fact that there have been share price movements following both these disclosures? Does she not recall that when an official, without authorization, leaked the contents of the budget last year, her right honourable friend, the then Shadow Chancellor, now the Chancellor, said, and I quote, I condemn this leak, and I think nobody can condone the leak of sensitive budget matters the day before the budget. I am sure that a full inquiry is going to be mounted. Will she tell the House why no inquiry is to be mounted this time? Why no select committee is to be set up, although it was in the Hugh Dalton case? And will she agree? Will she agree with the former Labour Prime Minister, Attlee, who said that the principle of the inviolability of the budget is of the highest importance and the discretion of the Chancellor of the Exchequer must be beyond question? Will she agree with Hugh Dalton himself when urged not to admit that he was the minister, but whichever Treasury Minister did brief the Times and was quoted by the Financial Times must own up and say he did it, and there must be an inquiry to clear these matters up before we can proceed?
Labour MPs pointing at the clock, saying Peter Lilly's gone on too long.
Madam Speaker, I think the right honourable gentleman has confirmed our fears that this is nothing more than a pathetic attempt to disrupt the country because the opposition are so afraid of the popularity of our manifesto commitments. The right honourable gentleman really ought to learn the difference between speculation and disclosure. Much of, as my right honourable friend the Prime Minister said, there's been speculation, as in the FT today, on every other budget that has taken place. On the specific charge he made about the issue of abolition of tax relief on medical insurance, which he claims has been revealed to the world for the first time today, may I actually remind the right honourable gentleman and his colleagues that on the 25th of February 1997, the Conservative Party published an attack on Labour's plans in which they included the words, Labour are committed to cutting VAT on fuel to 5%. Labour have said that they will pay for this by abolishing tax relief on medical insurance for pensioners. Madam Speaker, perhaps I could confirm to the House that the purpose of budget secrecy is to prevent sensitive material being leaked, not to prevent manifesto commitments being kept.
A large number of MPs want to speak. First, Robert Sheldon, the chairman of the Standards and Privileges Committee. Looks like the budget could be delayed a few more minutes if a number of MPs want to speak.
Budget day would not be the same if there were not rumours and guesses as to the contents of the budget. But what we have seen in the Financial Times is the only quote that is in there. It says that a senior minister states that we are pressing ahead. That's what we're doing, pressing ahead.
I think my right honourable friend will shortly find out that that is the case.
Mr. Paul Tyler.
Madam Speaker, can I just add to the quotation that's been read? It also said that a senior member of the government said the markets are bonkers. Is it not true, Madam Speaker? Can I make a constructive suggestion, Madam Speaker? I wonder whether the Leader of the House heard her colleague, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, responding to a point made by my honourable friend, the member for Caithness, about the advantages of open government in relation to the budgetary process. And in particular, if, as part of the government's proposals to improve that situation, we had more public discussion of the fiscal options in advance of the budget, so that such speculation as took place took in account of that discussion, and with that as background. And if, as part of the plans for open government, the government now could give us an undertaking that those strategic options and those fiscal opportunities were going to be discussed in the open, without the Chancellor disappearing into purdah for so many weeks, we would have a much more healthy democratic discussion than we do at the moment.
Well, I really think we can't have it both ways. We can't have complaints that there hasn't been enough secrecy and complaints that there's been too much at the same time.
Joe Kaufman.
Madam Speaker, you will recall that this morning you rebuked one of the minority parties for playing childish games. Will you now rebuke another of the minority parties for playing childish games and point out that it is that kind of childish game of which the electorate are entirely sick, that explains why they're on that side of the House and why after the next election they'll be below the gangway on that side.
He's referring to a tussle over seats in the chamber that took place earlier this morning. Now Bill Cash.
In view of the fact that the Right Honourable Lady has said that this is a matter of speculation, as has the Prime Minister, would she accept that there are strong grounds, as there were in 1947, for a stock exchange investigation to establish whether or not there is a connection between the soaring market prices yesterday and the allegations that have been made? Will she say whether or not she thinks that there should be a stock exchange investigation, and would she object if there was one?
No, I see no reason for one.
Mr. Dale Campbell-Savers.
Can I say to my honourable friend that I have a copy of this Financial Times article, and it's quite clear that not one single word in this article could be construed as a budget leak, not even in the wildest possible circumstances of imagination. And isn't the reality that all we have here is a publicity stunt by the Tories, and the country won't be fooled?
I think my honourable friend is quite right. The country won't be fooled, and I think the country is looking forward to hearing my right honourable friend's budget statement.
Bernard Jenkins.
Would the Right Honourable Lady, in the interest of her manifesto commitments in favour of open government and the highest standards in public life, therefore be happy to name the senior government minister who is mentioned in the article? Why won't she tell us, or is she ashamed of it?
Name it.
The honourable gentleman is talking about speculation in the papers, which takes place on every occasion.
Mrs. Audrey Wise.
Will my right honourable friend agree with me that it is by no means unusual for share prices to move on the basis of unfounded rumour? And will she therefore agree with me that this exposes the thinness of the opposition's likely response to my right honourable friend's budget statement when he is finally allowed to make it? And does she share my impatience for us to get on with it?
It certainly wasn't thought that this could go on quite so long. A few more MPs still trying to ask questions.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As I remember it, the Conservatives got quite upset when their budget statements were delayed in one year or another. Isn't there many other countries who have much more full discussion and debate in the run-up to the budget? Isn't there a case for far more discussion, not less? Shouldn't we be demystifying the whole rigmarole and flummery of the budget? And wouldn't that be more important than the Chancellor changing his jacket or his budget box?
I think my right honourable friend has made it clear what are his priorities, and I think that that is why he is anxious to make his statement to the House.
Mr. Dennis Skinner.
Does my right honourable friend recall that only last year there was a budget leak which was sent to the Daily Mirror? The Mirror, for some obscure reason I'll never understand, decided not to print it. But the Sun took it and printed it. I didn't hear a single word or a squeak from any Tory MP for a select committee, and what's more, we didn't get a statement about it either.
My honourable friend is quite right, and I think that members opposite have slipped into opposition mode very easily.
Madam Speaker, would the right honourable lady, the leader, would, Madam Speaker,
battling over the noise from the government benches.
Would the right honourable lady, the leader of the House, accept?
This House will come to order and hear the right honourable member. Order!
Speaker, would the right honourable lady, the leader of the House, accept that this House has a right to know what the government's position is? Is the right honourable lady saying there was no leak, or is she saying there was a leak but it doesn't matter? We're entitled to know. Moreover, would the leader of the House accept that in view of the lamentable way that last week's inquiry to the allegations against the right honourable gentleman, the Secretary of State for Wales, was conducted, the proper way, in accordance with precedent, is to set up an inquiry under the Inquiry and Tribunals Act?
So the former Agriculture Minister trying to get to the bottom of it all.
The right honourable gentleman should have been listening to what I said earlier. I said that I have seen no evidence that any details of the budget statement have been leaked. When he says he wants to know what we stand for, well, we went through the election campaign saying what would be in our first budget. We will find out soon to what extent we've kept our word.
We're now going to move into the budget.
Cheers all round.
Ways and Means.
Kenneth Clarke, it has to be said, the former Chancellor, is sitting up in the gallery watching all this with quite an air of detachment, it has to be said. Gordon Brown now placing his bottle of water on the dispatch box. Last year, Kenneth Clarke famously drank Glenfarclas whiskey, but no such move for Gordon Brown. Now, introductions before the budget actually starts. This speech expected to run for possibly an hour. Gordon Brown obviously hoping to impress his colleagues and the opposition benches with his first budget speech.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the budget that I lay before the House today represents more than simply an allocation of resources and an accounting of revenues. Because behind the numbers and the statistics, the central purpose of this budget is to ensure that Britain is equipped to rise to the challenge of the new and fast-changing global economy. Not just a few of us, but every one of us. Now, the impact of the global market in goods and services and of rapidly advancing technology is now being felt in every home and in every community of our country. New products, new services, new opportunities challenge us to change. Old skills, old jobs, old industries have gone and will never return. Yet for our country, the first industrial nation, this new global economy, driven by skills, creativity, and adaptability, offers a historic opportunity. The dynamic economies of the future will be those that unlock the talent of all the people. And our creativity, our adaptability, our belief as a nation in hard work and self-improvement, the very qualities that made Britain lead the world in the 18th and 19th centuries, are precisely the qualities we need to make Britain a strong economic power in the 21st century. But to achieve this, we must address the four weaknesses that have held us back for too long and for too many years: instability, underinvestment, unemployment, and the waste of talent. And in this budget, I will address each of these weaknesses in turn to ensure stability, investment, work, and opportunity for all. I turn first to stability, because without stability, all plans for investment, employment, and education founder. In a global economy, long-term investment will come to those countries that demonstrate stability in their monetary and fiscal policies and in their trading relationships. And for Britain, this means a commitment to stability in our relationships with Europe. In May, the government established a wholly new framework for monetary stability, open and accountable, based on clearly established rules and discipline, the government setting the inflation target, the Bank of England setting interest rates to meet that target. This reform signified our determination to break from the short-termism of the past and to establish long-term confidence. In this budget, I will match these measures for long-term monetary stability with measures to promote long-term fiscal stability. The Chancellor is first and foremost the guardian of the public finances, the people's money. But during the 1990s, the national debt has doubled, and this year alone, the taxpayer will pay out debt interest payments of £25 billion, more on debt than we spend on schools. Public finances must be sustainable over the long term. If they are not, then it is the poor, the elderly, and those on fixed incomes who depend most on public services that will suffer most. So as with our approach to monetary policy, so in fiscal policy. We will now establish clear rules, a new discipline, openness, and accountability. My first rule, the golden rule, ensures that over the economic cycle, the government will borrow only to invest and that current spending will be met from taxation. My second rule is that as a proportion of national income, public debt will be held at a prudent and stable level over the economic cycle. And to implement these rules, I am announcing today a 5-year deficit reduction plan. These rules and this plan will ensure a historic break from the short-termism and the expediency that have characterized the recent fiscal policies of our country. Now, as with our monetary policy, our fiscal policy will be all the more credible for being open and accountable. Immediately on coming to office, the government invited independent scrutiny by the National Audit Office of key assumptions in the public finance forecast. This independent scrutiny will continue into future budgets with further work by the National Audit Office and with publication some months in advance of every budget, an assessment for open debate in the country of what is happening to the economy and to the people's money. My budget today sets out a forecast for public borrowing this year and next year, and for the following 3 years, projections for the public finances based on different scenarios for the growth of public spending. And I can report that in each and every case, our deficit reduction plan ensures that we are on course to meet the 2 fiscal rules that will guide our approach to the public finances. Now, any budget seeking to achieve high and stable levels of growth and employment must be guided by the true state of the public finances, but also by a clear assessment of the state of the economy. And it's to that I will now turn. We have seen a rapid growth of consumer spending of nearly 4% over the last year. With the prospect of further windfalls from the building societies, consumer spending is likely to remain strong. There has been a sharp rise of 7 to 11% in house prices, with even higher rises in the southeast. The growth of average earnings has accelerated to 4.5% a year. The rate of broad money growth has been around 10% for a year. These increases in consumer spending, earnings, and money supply are continuing even as industrial production and manufacturing output have been recovering only slowly. It is essential that consumer spending is underpinned by investment and industrial growth. Britain cannot afford a recurrence of the all-too-familiar pattern of previous recoveries. Accelerating consumer spending and borrowing, side by side with skill shortages, capacity constraints, increased imports, and rising inflation. Already there are warning signs that this pattern could be repeated. In similar circumstances, some of my predecessors have ignored these signs, while others have deluded themselves into believing that growth, however unbalanced, was evidence of their success. I will not ignore the warning signs, and I will not repeat past mistakes. The Treasury's assessment is that the output gap is close to zero, and there is a risk that output could already be above trend. In other words, our sustainable rate of growth is too low for growth to continue at its current pace without the risk of more inflation. That is why in May I judged interest rate increases were necessary, and events since then have confirmed that this was the correct judgment. But against these pressures, we must take into account both the subdued level of producer price inflation and the current strength of sterling, which over the last year has appreciated by 18%. I understand and I share the concerns of industry and exporters, and I will address them. As the figures demonstrate, there is now an imbalance between strong growth in the consumer and service sector and weak growth in the manufacturing and exporting sector. Nevertheless, what worries manufacturers even more is that inflation could get out of control and herald a return to the instability of stock go. My goal, therefore, is to ease inflationary pressures without damage to industrial and exporting prospects, and to do so in a way that is consistent with our long-term objective of high and stable growth and employment. In this way, we can moderate the upward pressure on interest rates and on the exchange rate, as well as further our objective of sustainable public finances. I have therefore decided to tighten fiscal policy as a result of budget measures, including the windfall tax, by £5.5 billion this year and £4.75 billion next year. And with the resulting reductions in the deficit, I am able to present an economic forecast, putting us back on course for a more balanced and more lasting recovery, and for long-term stability in the public finances. The forecast is that national income will grow by 3.25% this year and 2.5% next year before returning to its trend rate. Consumer spending, which is now expected to increase by 4.5% this year, is now forecast to grow more slowly at 4% next year. Business investment, which has failed to meet expectations over the past 2 years, is forecast to rise strongly this year and next, so increasing investment share of our national income. Finally, inflation is expected to remain at 2.5% this year, the government's target, rising slightly to 2.75% next year as a result of the failure by the last government to take early action to control inflation before returning to 2.5% in 1999. To achieve long-term stability is to achieve something no government has done for decades. But stability is a necessary, not a sufficient condition of the government's objectives of high and stable levels of growth and employment. A prudent estimate of the current trend rate of growth is only 2.25%. So raising the long-term growth rate of our economy is our major challenge. And that is why the announcements that follow represent a new kind of budget for higher growth, one whose main priorities are to invest for the long term, particularly in skills, to modernize the welfare state, and to maximize opportunity for all, the modern route to economic success. While previous budgets used to be about dividing up today's wealth, this and future budgets will concentrate on laying the foundations for tomorrow's wealth. and it's to far-reaching measures that will raise the quantity and quality of investment that I will now turn. Since 1980, the United Kingdom has invested a lower share of national income than most other industrialised countries, and national income per worker has been lower too. For every £100 invested per worker in the United Kingdom, Germany has invested over £140, the United States and France around £150, and Japan over £160. Now, the objective behind our 2-year-long corporate tax review, begun in opposition, has been to develop a tax system that encourages personal savings, favours higher levels of investment, rewards long-term investment, and is fair to all. Our consultations on capital gains tax will be completed in time for the next budget. Half the adult population of our country hardly saves at all. So in order to encourage personal savings, the government will, as promised, introduce from 1999 individual savings accounts, extending the principle of TESAs and PEPs, continuing to offer favourable tax reliefs for saving. Through the individual savings account, we intend to encourage the habit of saving among people who have never saved before. I can confirm also that this budget will not proceed with the last government's proposal to phase out tax relief on employee pension contributions. This point in the recovery is, however, the right time to make changes in corporation tax to encourage more long-term investment. My changes in monetary policy were designed to help companies make long-term investment decisions with confidence. The changes in corporation tax are directed to the same long-term objective. I want the United Kingdom to be the obvious first choice for new investment. So I have decided to cut the rate of corporation tax by 2%, from 33% to 31%, the lowest ever rate in the United Kingdom. This means that we will have the lowest corporation tax rate of any of our major competitors, Germany, France, America, or Japan, and we will have it under a Labour government. This is a long-term commitment that will increase both inward investment and domestic investment to the benefit of the whole country. Too often, British companies have invested too late and too little in the economic cycle. Because I want companies to get the benefit now, the 2% corporation tax cut will apply from April 1997. This tax cut is the first component of this budget's investment strategy. The second is a structural reform that will also encourage investment. The present system of tax credits encourages companies to pay out dividends rather than reinvest their profits. This cannot be the best way of encouraging investment for the long term. And this was acknowledged by the last government. Many pension funds are in substantial surplus, and at present many companies are enjoying pension holidays. So this is the right time to undertake a long-needed reform. The last government cut tax credits paid to funds and companies. With immediate effect, I propose to abolish tax credits paid to pension funds and companies. And in all the consequential changes I will make, I have been and I will be fair. For PEP holders, for individuals who do not pay tax, and for charities, tax credits will continue to be paid until April 1999. By this time, the introduction of the individual savings account will ensure that individuals have the opportunity to continue to be able to save with tax advantages. So they will continue to have favourable tax incentives to invest in equities. Basic and lower rate taxpayers do not pay any extra tax on dividends they receive, and that will remain the position. And we will ensure that higher rate taxpayers will pay no more than they do now on their dividends. Advanced corporation tax will continue to be paid by companies on their dividends at the same rate as now. And to stop the yield from ACT being eroded by greater use of foreign income dividends, we are ending the foreign income dividend scheme from 6 April 1999. International holding companies will continue to pay dividends out of foreign income without paying advanced corporation tax. I will make special provision for charities through public expenditure. Tax credits will be paid to them until April 1999, and after April 1999, the government will fund a 5-year transitional period. So charities will have 7 years in total in which to adjust to the change. Charities have themselves been pressing for a review of their tax treatment for some time. The government will now consult widely on how the tax treatment of charities can be made more appropriate to help charities today. Charities too will of course gain, like others, from the longer-term benefit to their shareholdings that higher company investment and profits will bring. In future, Mr. Deputy Speaker, new jobs are likely to come from a large number of small businesses than from a small number of large businesses. And the route to success here is not for the government to try to pick winners, but to create an environment in which more firms have more chances by their own efforts to succeed. That is why I have decided to do more to assist investment in small business. I have therefore decided to cut the small companies' tax rate by 2% from 23% to 21%, and to do so from April 1997. Now, in the past, investment incentives have been introduced in recessions when companies are least able to consider new investment. But at this point in the economic cycle, an investment incentive should encourage companies considering future investments to bring these investments forward. I have therefore decided with immediate effect to double for 1 year the level of first-year capital allowances on plant and machinery for small and medium-sized firms. This will apply to both companies and unincorporated businesses. And this means that if a firm invests within the next 12 months, it can set off against tax not a quarter of its investment as hitherto, but a half. Over 3.5 million businesses will be eligible for this relief. It will be worth 230 million to small and medium-sized businesses next year and 170 million the year after. It will be largely paid for by reinstating the 1-year carryback time for corporate losses, which was temporarily extended to 3 years during the recession. Now, taken together, the cut in corporation tax and the new investment incentive represent a very significant boost for small business investment. Britain now moves forward with one of the most favourable tax regimes for small businesses of any country. This government will support the small businesses of Britain. Britain is increasingly leading the world in those industries which most obviously depend on the skills and talents of their workers. Industries like communications, design, architecture, fashion, music and film. Our National Endowment for Science, Technology and the Arts will offer talented young artists and scientists the finance to turn British ideas into successful business ventures. But despite the film industry's outstanding record of creative and critical success, too many British films that could be made in Britain are being made abroad or not at all. The talents of British filmmakers can and should, wherever possible, be employed to the benefit of the British economy. So after today, production and acquisition costs on British films with budgets of 15 million or less will qualify for 100% write-off for tax purposes when the film is completed. This is a 3-year measure at a cost of £30 million that should not only boost the number of British films, but boost the British economy by increasing our exports. In the new economy, where capital inventions, even raw materials, are mobile, Britain has only one truly national resource. It is the talent and potential of its people. Yet in Britain today, 1 in 5 of working-age households has no one earning a wage. In place of welfare, there should be work. So today, this budget is taking the first steps to create the new welfare state for the 21st century. The welfare state was and remains a great British achievement. It was set up to provide security for all and opportunity for all, goals that are as relevant today as they were in 1945. But for millions out of work or suffering poverty in work, the welfare state today denies rather than provides opportunity. So it is time for the welfare state to put opportunity back into people's hands. First, everyone in need of work should have the opportunity to work. Secondly, we must ensure that work pays. And thirdly, everyone who seeks to advance through employment and education must be given the means to advance. So we will create a new ladder of opportunity that will allow the many, by their own efforts, to benefit from opportunities once open only to a few. Starting from next year, every young person aged 18 to 25 who is unemployed for more than 6 months will be offered a first step on the employment ladder. Tomorrow, my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Education and Employment, will detail the 4 options, all involving training leading to qualifications. A job with an employer, work with a voluntary organisation, work on the environmental task force, and for those without basic qualifications, the chance of full-time education or training. With these new opportunities for young people come new responsibilities. There will be no 5th option to stay at home on full benefit. So when they sign on for benefit, they will be signing up for work. Benefits will be cut if young people refuse to take up the opportunities. This new deal for the young is comprehensive, it is rich in opportunity, it is linked to the development of skills, and it has already attracted the support of some of Britain's leading companies. I urge every business to play its part in this national crusade to equip this country for the future by taking on young unemployed men and women. I would appeal to every voluntary organisation to make a further contribution to the work they do in the community by taking on a young person. And I will make it possible for every member of this House, on all sides of this House, to act as an ambassador for this venture, encouraging young people in their constituencies, consulting with local businesses, and bringing them together to play their part in this new deal for young people. There are 350,000 adults who have been out of work for 2 years or longer. So the second component of our Welfare to Work programme will offer employers a £75 a week subsidy to employ long-term unemployed men and women. Many of these unemployed who lack skills are debarred by the 16-hour rule from obtaining them. For this group, the unskilled, the 16-hour rule will now be relaxed. So that when the long-term unemployed sign on for benefit, they will now sign up for work or for training. This programme, £3.5 billion, which includes an unallocated reserve of £500 million, will provide money over a full Parliament. It will be the main item funded from the windfall tax on the excess profits of the privatised utilities, the details of which I will give the House shortly. But in this budget, I will address also the needs of 2 other important groups in our society: lone parents and those in receipt of incapacity and disability benefits, who as a matter of principle should have the right to work. There are now 1 million lone parents bringing up 2 million children on benefit. Any welfare to work programme that seriously tackles poverty in our country must put new employment opportunities in the hands of lone parents. So today I'm allocating a total of £200 million from the Windfall Fund for the most innovative programme any government has introduced for advice, training and day and after school childcare to support lone parents. Currently, lone parents receive little encouragement to seek work before their youngest child is 16. Under the programme I'm announcing today, when the youngest child is in the second term of full-time schooling, lone parents will be invited for job search interviews and offered help in finding work that suits their circumstances. On Friday, my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Social Security, will explain to the House the full details of how this new radical programme will be introduced. A generation of parents have waited for the government to introduce a national childcare strategy. From this budget forwards, childcare will no longer be seen as an afterthought or a fringe element of social policies, but from now on, as it should be, an integral part of our economic policy. So we will first increase the supply of childcare in our country, and we will make it more accessible. As part of the New Deal for young people, we will encourage voluntary organisations to take on and to train young people and help them into careers as childcare assistants. We believe that over a 5-year period, as many as 50,000 young people can be trained as childcare assistants. We will make childcare more affordable as well. From next summer, every lone parent with more than one child who qualifies for family credit, housing benefit or council tax benefit will have the first £100 of weekly childcare costs disregarded in calculating their in-work benefit. And every lone parent on family credit with children of 12 years or younger will be able to receive help. Lottery money will be available for after-school clubs, and as we replace the wasteful and chaotic system of nursery vouchers, we will be able to offer reliable access to nursery places for every 4-year-old in Britain. So with these measures that bring both childcare and employment within the reach of many more parents, we have taken the first step to a national childcare strategy for the United Kingdom. No one in our society in 1997 should be excluded from the right to work, either because of disability or incapacity if they want to do some work. So a final element of our welfare to work strategy, we will bring forward proposals to help those who are disabled or on incapacity benefit who want training or work. And to fund this programme and other measures, I've set aside £200 million from the Windfall Fund. Now, taken together, these comprehensive and ambitious initiatives means that from now on, no section of society and no one should suffer permanent exclusion. For too long, the United Kingdom has been united only in name. From today, ours is a country where everyone has a contribution to make. The second principle of the new welfare state is to ensure that work always pays. In May, I established, under the chairmanship of Martin Taylor, a review to consider how we can streamline and modernise the tax and benefit system to help employment opportunity and work incentives and to assist in strengthening family life. We will introduce a 10p rate of income tax as soon as it is prudent to do so. A 10p tax rate, combined with a cut in benefit tapers, will reduce in-work poverty, as too will the minimum wage, which the government will introduce after advice from the new Low Pay Commission. Set at a sensible level, the minimum wage will not only establish a floor under wages, but ensure in-work benefits act as a genuine top-up for low-paid workers rather than a subsidy for low-paying employers. So I have also asked Martin Taylor to consider at an early stage the advantages of introducing a new in-work tax credit for low-paid workers. It would draw on the successful experience of the American Earned Income Tax Credit, which helps reduce in-work poverty and now helps 19 million lower-paid workers in America. Conclusions that emerge from this tax benefit review will inform the judgments in my next budget, which I have decided will be in the spring of 1998. The third component of the new welfare state is the establishment of a skills ladder, so that every employee is encouraged to learn skills through their working lives. It is our intention to introduce individual learning accounts, and to increase the staying on rates at school and colleges, we'll complete our review of educational finance and maintenance for 16 to 18-year-olds to ensure that resources are used to support those most in need. And just as the Open University since the 1960s has offered second chances in higher education through television to people in their homes, the new University of Industry that we propose can, from the 1990s onwards, through satellite, cable and interactive technologies, bring lifelong learning direct to millions in their homes as well as workplaces. I have therefore allocated from the Welfare to Work budget $5 million to start up the public-private partnership that will fund the new University for Industry. So by these measures, which will create work, make sure that work always pays, and provide recurring opportunities for lifelong learning, the new welfare state will help equip Britain for the modern world. Mr. Deputy Speaker, a country equipped for the future should also have a modern tax system based on principle. The tax system sends critical signals about the economic activities a society wishes to promote and to deter. Today, I start to put these principles into practice by demonstrating our commitment to the environment. As the Statement of Environmental Principles set out by my honourable friend, the Financial Secretary, which is published today, shows, we are determined that our tax system and economic policies as a whole encourage the good and discourage the harmful. The extraction of aggregates, including stone, sand and gravel, involve significant environmental costs and damage to the landscape, which may go beyond that recognised in the scope and level of the landfill tax. Too little is also being done to discourage water pollution. The environmental case for charges on polluters needs to be examined carefully as well. And after a period of consultation, I will return with any proposals in these two areas for my next budget. Existing taxes, including our excise duties, must also advance the government's environmental objectives. So to reduce pollution, lorries and buses that meet low emission standards will from next year attract a reduction of vehicle excise duty by a maximum of £500. Rises in vehicle excise duty, broadly in line with inflation, will take place from 17th November. And in line with the environmental objectives I have set down, road fuel duties will increase by an extra 1% every year over and above the annual 5% real rate of increase established by the previous government. So petrol will go up by the equivalent of 4 pence a litre from 6 o'clock this evening. I have also decided to raise the annual rate of increase in tobacco duties. From 1st December this year, these will be increased by an extra 2% a year, this year by another 5 pence, above the annual 3% real rate of increase established by the previous government. In the normal course of events, the price of a packet of 20 cigarettes would have risen by over 14 pence. Under my proposals, the price of a packet will rise on 1st December by 19 pence. Alcohol and tobacco duties demand careful consideration this year, not least because of the impact of fraud, smuggling and cross-border shopping. I have therefore decided to review all alcohol duties and tobacco duties. While this review is underway, inflation-only rises for alcohol will take effect from from January. The tax burden avoided by the few falls on the many. And so in 8 weeks of this government, we have already identified a series of significant tax abuses. I'm introducing measures with immediate effect to end tax abuses through avoidance of corporation tax, VAT, or pay as you earn. Changes to insurance premium tax to block an abuse relating to long-term health insurance will take effect from 1st October. I am also proposing to modernise the rules governing transfer pricing and controlled foreign companies. The details of these changes will be available at the end of my speech. And in total, these initial measures to tackle tax avoidance will bring in a cumulative total of £1.7 billion over 4 years. A government committed to the proper funding of public services will not tolerate the avoidance of taxation, and we will be relentless in our war against tax avoidance. So I have instructed the Inland Revenue to carry out a wide-ranging review of areas of tax avoidance with a view to further legislation in future finance bills. And I have specifically asked them to consider a general anti-avoidance rule. The principle of fairness in taxation will guide all my budget decisions. So I can today announce that at this, the first opportunity, the government will honour its pledge to cut VAT on fuel and power. To help pay for this, we will withdraw the relief for private medical insurance for the over 60. It costs £140 million a year, and it has failed to achieve its original purpose of substantially increasing the take-up of private medical insurance. I would like to abolish VAT on fuel, but European rules prevent me from doing so. Therefore, VAT will be cut to the lowest level compatible with European law, that is 5%, from 1st September, well in advance of winter fuel bills. I come to other taxes. In this budget, I have no changes to make to income tax either at the basic or the top rate. I will not extend VAT to children's clothes, food, books, newspapers, or public transport fares. Nor will I during this Parliament. This is a government that keeps its promises on tax. To cut
Remark from the Conservative benches.
To cut fuel bills further, I intend to make a further tax cut. The gas levy imposed by the last government has pushed prices for domestic consumers higher than they would otherwise be. So from next April, we are reducing the gas levy to zero. 18.5 million domestic customers will benefit from this change. Their gas bills should fall by about 2% on average, and as a result of these two changes, including reduction in VAT on fuel and other price cuts, I expect gas prices to fall in real terms by 5.5% this year, 11% next year, which will mean a fall of £90 in next year's fuel bills compared with last year. Many of the least well-insulated houses in Britain are occupied by older people. No pensioner should be in a position where, for reasons of finance, they cannot adequately insulate their homes. And today, with our new programme of training and jobs for young people, we are able to expand the national programme of home insulation. Contractors within the Home Energy Efficiency Scheme and voluntary organisations will be encouraged to take on young people to insulate the homes of pensioners. This will give jobs and skills to our young people. It will help and protect our elderly. It will improve our environment, and it will tackle fuel poverty. Poorly insulated housing is but one of the most conspicuous failures of housing policies over the last 20 years. Even more serious is inadequate provision of low-cost rented accommodation throughout our country. This has led to overcrowding, the costly and wasteful use of bed and breakfast accommodation, and in some cases, homelessness. This government has a commitment to decent housing at affordable rents because we believe that overcrowding and homelessness on a scale we have seen are intolerable in a civilized society. Building and repairing homes will answer a pressing social need, and it will offer opportunities for skilled and productive employment. I can therefore announce the first step in a practical and measured programme to phase the release of capital receipts. Local authorities will have borrowing consents for an additional £900 million, £200 million this year, £700 million next year for building new houses and for repairing their existing stock. The detailed proposals for England, together with measures specific to Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, will be announced by the relevant Secretaries of State. Now, for most people, the acquisition of a house is the biggest single investment they will make. Homeowners rightly expect their investment to be protected by sensible policies pursued by government. I am determined that as a country, we never return to the instability, the speculation, the negative equity that characterized the housing market in the 1980s and the 1990s. Volatility is damaging both to the housing market and to the economy as a whole. So stability will be central to our policy to help homeowners, and we must be prepared to take the action necessary to secure it. I will not allow house prices to get out of control and put at risk the sustainability of the recovery. I have therefore decided it is right to take two measures aimed at stability in the housing market. First, I will raise stamp duty from 1% to 1.5% on property sales above £250,000 and to 2% for property sales above £500,000.
Conservative MPs pointing at Tony Blair, whose house has just gone on the market at about that price.
This will take immediate effect after the budget resolution has been voted by the House. And secondly, continuing the reforms begun by the previous government, which removed mortgage tax relief at the higher rate of 40% in 1991 and then cut it to 15% by 1995, I propose to reduce mortgage tax relief by a further 5% from 15% to 10% from April 1998. The timing of my measure should help to avoid a return to the conditions of the 1980s, where failure to take early action guaranteed there were worse problems later on. I believe that these measures will help to ensure what we all want, a more balanced recovery. Now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, our reform of the welfare state and the programme to move the unemployed from welfare to work is funded by a new and a one-off windfall tax on the excess profits of the privatised utilities. This tax, I can tell the House, will apply to companies privatised by flotation and subject to economic regulation under the specified Acts of Parliament. In determining the details of the tax, I believe I have struck a fair balance between recognising the position of utilities today and their undervaluation and under-regulation at the time of privatisation. The windfall tax will be related to the excessively high profits made under the initial regime. A company's tax bill will be based on the difference between the value that was placed on it at privatisation and a more realistic market valuation based on its after-tax profits for up to the first 4 full accounting years following privatisation. In preparing the windfall tax, we looked more broadly at the position of the affected companies. As a result of my earlier announcement, justified on its own merits to reduce the gas levy to zero, I am satisfied that no company faces an unduly heavy tax burden. The windfall tax will raise some £2.1 billion from the electricity sector, around £1.65 billion from the water sector, and some £1.45 billion from the remaining companies. After taking the reduction in the gas levy into account, which will cost the government £400 million over the next 3 years, the net effect of the gas levy and the windfall tax together will raise £4.8 billion. After consulting the regulators, it is my judgment that the tax can be paid without any impact on prices, investment, or the quality of service to customers. Or in my view, on employment. In recent weeks, many companies have asked to pay the tax in instalments. I have now agreed that this shall be the case. It will be a one-off tax payable in 2 instalments, the first instalment on December the 1st, 1997, the second a year later. Full details of how the windfall tax will apply and the companies who will pay it will be set out in an Inland Revenue press release available at the conclusion of this statement. Now, based on the fiscal tightening I have now announced today, I can give full details of our 5-year deficit reduction plan. This deficit reduction plan is aimed at reducing the structural budget deficit. It is made possible by a long-term commitment on our part to financial discipline. It takes into account the uncertainties and risks involved in and forecasting the economic cycle. It is underpinned by our comprehensive review of the way government spends its money. And it matches rigour today with a long-term commitment to prudent and sustainable public finances. In January this year, I announced that we would adhere for 2 years to the agreed control totals for public spending. That commitment is reaffirmed today and integral to the budget statement. I announced there would be no spending round this year, nor will there be. Departments are working within already announced departmental spending totals to reorder spending from low priority to high priority areas. I am pleased to report that they are not only identifying waste and inefficiencies in existing spending, but they are now redistributing these savings to the long-term priorities of this government, not the last. So the figures I can now give for my deficit reduction plan exclude windfall tax revenues. Borrowing was projected in the last budget to be £19.25 billion this year. It is now set to be £13.25 billion. Borrowing that was projected to be £12.25 billion next year is now set to be £5.5 billion. So our deficit reduction plan ensures that borrowing, which was £22.75 billion last year, is now set to fall to £5.5 billion next year. And beyond these years, I am publishing today a range of projections based on different assumptions for spending. And in every case for these next 3 years, we meet the golden rule, we see debt falling as a proportion of national income, and because of our discipline and the measures we have taken, we go below the borrowing projections of the previous government. And for this year and for the foreseeable future, we are comfortably within the Maastricht criteria for levels of debt and borrowing. Tough and prudent management is our watchword in what will continue to be a thoroughly disciplined approach to the public finances. The comprehensive spending review will determine overall priorities for the early decades of the next century. In the case of the National Health Service, the first stage of our cuts in bureaucracy are being implemented this year. By next spring, the first conclusions from the strategic review of London hospitals will be implemented. We will act to improve the organisation of services, including merging National Health Service trusts. By dismantling the inefficient internal market, we will no longer have to spend money promoting competition and servicing innumerable short-term contracts and the administration that goes with them, all at the expense of patient care. That will now change. And because we have reinvigorated the private finance initiative, we will shortly announce a new house-building programme across the country. We will also act to recoup in full the cost of treating road traffic accidents from insurance companies. And this, like the action we are taking against prescription fraud, shows our determination to ensure that National Health Service resources are focused on frontline patient care. In normal circumstances, the £5 billion reserved for 1998-1999 would be distributed during the annual autumn spending round, with the allocations announced at the time of the November budget. There is no spending round this autumn, and there will be no budget until next spring. I propose that the majority of the reserve be retained for contingencies that may arise in the coming year. But now that the long-term changes are underway, I want the National Health Service to be able to plan also for the year ahead. I want them to do so in the sure knowledge of a prudent and realistic allocation for 1998-1999, which will ensure that services are maintained and patient care is secure. Yeah. The long-term plans we have agreed mean that we are now sure the money will go where it is needed, direct to patient care. So I have decided to allocate from the reserve to the National Health Service for 1998-1999 a sum of £1.2 billion.
No cheers coming from the Conservative benches, but all from the government benches.
Does more than meet our commitment to the people of this country for a real-term increase in resources. Health spending will now rise by 5%, 2.25% in real terms, the same as our projection for the trend growth rate of the economy as a whole. The public rightly wants to see more money put into the National Health Service, but it wants the money to go directly to patient care. So this money is being granted on the firm agreement that the administrative reforms we propose for the health service be fully implemented and that frontline patient care will benefit. Education is our country's priority. It holds the key to our future. The government must be satisfied that resources in education are going direct to learning in our classroom. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Education and Employment, and ministers in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales will bring forward proposals so that every school can meet standards for results and discipline. We will ensure that schools and local education authorities meet targets for raising standards in their areas. They must demonstrate that money is being spent improving the quality of pupils' education. For next year, while we review the future arrangements for local authority finance, capping will remain in place. But I propose to allocate from the reserve for next year, and specifically for use in schools, an additional £1 billion to education. The details
Paddy Ashdown just gave a thumbs up sign.
For education and employment, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Mr. Deputy Speaker, traditionally these announcements of revenue and allocations would complete a budget. But I have one more announcement to make. The windfall tax will finance our measures for employment and training. But there is nothing more important to the training of young people than what happens in our schools. Indeed, many of the problems our Welfare to Work programme must now address start in our schools. We cannot run a first-rate economy on the basis of second-rate education. Economic success tomorrow will depend on investing in our schools today. But at the present rate of progress, many of our children will be educated for the 21st century in classrooms built in the 19th. Today, 1 million pupils are being educated in classrooms built before the First World War. If our schools are to educate for the needs of the 21st century economy, they must themselves become schools fit to learn in and equipped for the 21st century. By encouraging schools to engage in public-private partnerships, any public investment we make can lever in even more resources to renovate our schools. And I want schools not just to repair the roofs and the fabric, but to acquire the modern equipment and the computers they need. So I have decided to allocate cash from the remaining proceeds of the windfall tax for an immediate programme of capital investment to equip our schools with the infrastructure, the technology, and the bright modern classrooms they need. My honourable friend, the Paymaster General, and the Ministers for Education will invite schools to submit plans showing how they propose to upgrade, modernise and become schools fit for the 21st century. The details will be announced in due course. I therefore propose to make available £1.3 billion over the course of the Parliament. Representing a capital investment that averages almost £150 for every pupil in this country. Taken together with the extra year-to-year expenditure I have just announced, this budget allocates £2.3 billion in new resources for our schools. With this increase in educational investment, we are taking the first step towards delivering our manifesto commitment to increase the proportion of national income spent on education. In education, as in every other area, we are honouring our pledges to the British people. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the measures I have announced today for stability, for investment, for employment opportunity for all, and for education will make Britain better equipped and more ready to face the future with confidence. Previous budgets pursued the short-term interests of the few. This budget advances the long-term interests of the many. This is a budget equipping Britain for the future, meeting the people's priorities, a people's budget for Britain's future, and I commend it to the House and to the country.
Well, the former Prime Minister John Major was shaking his head during some parts of that speech.
So Alan Hazelhurst, the Deputy Chairman of Ways and Means, gets up, and in a moment we'll hear from William Hague. But there, Gordon Brown, at the end of the first Labour budget statement in 18 years, very soberly, strongly delivered. Some previous Chancellors had rushed their first budget statement. He did it very clearly, not many jokes in it. And among the key measures he announced, no change in income tax, and on Maris, on mortgages that is, there's going to be a cut to 10% on the advantage that you get from that in April, and stamp duties going up on homes over 250,000. Various changes in duties. He said he was going to act green. Spirits will go up by 10p a bottle, and beer up by a penny a pint, and wine up by 4p a bottle, and cigarettes up by 19p a pack. Not yet, though. On petrol, on the other hand, motoring, those go up straight away, and there were changes on diesel and on petrol, and they go up by 4p tonight. And he did some of the things he said he'd do. The VAT, for instance, on fuel will fall to 5% on the 1st of September, and elderly people who take insurance on health will no longer get a tax allowance on that. But the big surprise, really, that came through was that he's spending an extra 1.2 billion on the National Health Service and 1 billion on education immediately, with a further 1.3 billion on education for repairs to schools, 2.3 billion over a Parliament, 1.1 billion immediately. So big spending on the National Health Service that wasn't expected, that wasn't announced in the during the election campaign, but which he's found from the reserves that the government has in hand, the money that they use when they fight a war or do other things, and that's how it stands now. So in the, well, I think we might just see what's going on in the House, because I have a look at this. I think that we're about to have William Hague. Yes, here he is, Leader of the Opposition. He has to respond straight away to what the Chancellor said.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, on a personal level, may I congratulate the Chancellor on his fortitude in delivering his speech, and in doing so within the space of 1 hour with only the assistance of water. I could congratulate him more enthusiastically if all of the contents of this budget had been delivered to Parliament first, as we discussed in this House earlier today. We were told by the Prime Minister and the Leader of the House earlier this afternoon that it had all been speculation, what was printed in the Financial Times today. Remarkable, wasn't it, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that the Chancellor opened his speech by saying that he had a 5-year deficit reduction plan, and the headline of the Financial Times today was, "Budget will cut deficit over 5 years." Extraordinary. Extraordinary that there was such speculation and that it turned out to be so well-founded. Extraordinary, too, that the speculation referred to the abolition of the dividend tax credit, and that is exactly what the Chancellor has announced in the course of his budget speech. They must be remarkable journalists at the Financial Times who not only dreamt that a senior member of the government had told them something, but dreamt exactly accurately what that senior member of the government might have told them. It is extraordinary, in the view of the opposition, that government sources revealed those measures in advance. And it is to be hoped that the government will now come to realise that budget leaks can affect the movements of billions of pounds and the savings of millions of people. They should have a thorough investigation, and they should report that investigation to the House. The Chancellor also opened his speech by saying that he would be bound by strict rules which he would adopt for the rest of this Parliament. We could be forgiven for noting that all Labour governments have started with strict rules which were going to bind themselves throughout their Parliament, and all have ended up abandoning them. There are some things in this budget which we will certainly welcome. The cut in taxation for small companies is most certainly one of them. There are some things at which we will need to look at the details as our debates on these matters become clear. But one thing is very clear about the budget. When the Prime Minister said before the election, and I quote, "We've no plans to increase tax at all," he did not mean a word of it. That is clear. Because this is a tax-raising budget. When the Chancellor says he is tightening fiscal policy by £5.75 billion, he means he is introducing a tax-raising budget. And the changes to advanced corporation tax, the changes to MIRAS, amount to tax rises which the Labour Party denied they would introduce before the general election. Not only did the Prime Minister say on the 21st of September last year, "We've no plans to increase tax at all," he said on the 2nd of August, "Our proposals do not involve raising taxes. If we have any such proposals, we will make them clear before the next election." Why were these proposals not made clear before that general election? He said on the 8th of January this year, "The programme of the Labour Party does not imply any tax increases at all." If that were true, why have these tax increases been announced today? Of course we can be relaxed about some things. Things like 2% on stamp duty for houses worth over £500,000 will only be of concern to a small number of rich people like the Prime Minister. Many people can relax about that. But other people are going to have to pay for the Labour Party breaking its election promises in this budget. The changes to MIRAS will add to insecurity, destroy confidence in the housing market, and make people much more wary of buying and selling homes. Those are not my words, they are the words of the Prime Minister a year ago, who said that restrictions to MIRAS would add to insecurity, destroy confidence in the market, and make people much more wary of buying and selling homes. Can he honestly say that he gave the country an accurate reflection of what he would do on this subject if and when he came to power? Honourable members opposite have never been in sympathy with home ownership, and they are clearly not going to start being in sympathy with home ownership today. So this is a budget in which the government have broken a central election promise, in which they have tried to comfort their supporters by saying that there will be a £1.2 billion increase in health service spending. Last year there was a £1.6 billion increase in health service spending. And as we look at the budget of this administration and future budgets, we must always remember that rarely, if ever, has a government had such cause to be grateful to its predecessor for the state of the economy it has inherited. The last government, and my right honourable friend, the member for Rushcliffe in particular as Chancellor, left the economy thriving. And honourable members opposite should note that the man who said that the right honourable member for Rushcliffe left the economy thriving was Lord Healey on the World at One this afternoon.
Okay, well, let's leave the House of Commons now and go back to the budget statement. William Hague there on his feet as leader of the Tories. Just a reminder of the main measures that were in the budget. There were no changes in income tax rates. They said there'd be none in the budget, and the Chancellor said there wouldn't be any over the 5 years of this Parliament. On mortgage interest relief, MIRAS, it is going to be cut from 15% to 10% from April. Stamp duty, that's next April, of course, and stamp duty on houses is going to go up 1.5%. It's 1% at the moment on homes over 250,000. To some laughter, he said it would go up for houses over 500,000. Tony Blair has 1 to 2% stamp duty on new purchases, on buying houses and selling houses. Duties, here are the figures. The variable figures, and of course the Chancellor, as he said, has to take account all the time of the problem of people crossing to the continent and buying drink where its duty is rather less. Spirits go up 19 pence a bottle, beer up 1 penny a pint, wine up 4 pence a bottle. Cigarettes, he said he was going to be tougher on, and indeed is, and they're going up by 19 pence a pack from the 1st of December. And on motoring, these changes take effect immediately. Well, the car tax, this goes up to 150. That's a very small increase in November, but petrol goes up and diesel goes up, both of them by 4 pence a litre, and that takes effect, as always, with those duties at 6 o'clock tonight. So there's the main outline of the changes. The other big change he announced was the increase in spending on the NHS, unexpectedly, of £1 billion and 1.2 billion, and increasing in £1 billion of spending on education, both money that he found from the contingency reserve. So he was able to do what he said right through they wouldn't do, which was to adopt the Tory spending plan by finding this pocket of money. There'll no doubt be a lot of discussion about it. He's pleased his backbenchers and the teaching lobbies and the nursing lobbies, and indeed the patients' lobbies, by putting some money into both the National Health Service and education. Well, now let's go and find out some reaction to this. Let's go to the cafe in Chester and join Diana Madill. Diana.
Thank you very much indeed, David. Well, first of all, we'll have reaction from two young people, both of whom have been on training schemes in the past and find them a real disappointment. But let's hear what they think about the Welfare to Work scheme. Mike Morgan, first of all, how does it sound?
Well, part of it sounds to me like a very cheap way of emptying bins. The training schemes, to me, I mean, I've been on a few of them. I don't see that they're going to rapidly get better overnight. A lot of them involve sitting around drinking cups of tea. The qualifications aren't any good. It's, generally speaking, most people end up back on the dole after 3 to 6 months.
Do you think, Caroline, that this one's going to be any different?
Doesn't sound like it, apart from the compulsion actually sounds stronger than it's been over the past few years.
And what about the suggestions that young people could help older people with insulation in their houses and also become childcare assistants?
It's a good idea, as long as the young people who are actually going to be asked to do these things actually want to do it. I wouldn't want to trust my daughter to somebody who actually didn't want to be doing the job.
Thank you very much indeed. Let's move on. We'll find out what small business think of all this. So, Nigel Bruce, how do you think businesses in Chester will respond to some of the initiatives that the Chancellor put forward to encourage investment in business?
I think we'll be pleasantly surprised with the tax benefits. I think those are positive. Surprised that he hasn't been as radical as I thought he might have been. I think it basically we're favourable, but I'm not quite sure that he's really got to grips with it fully. He did at least recognise that the small industries are the engine house of the economy, and perhaps he'll get to grips with that later on.
What else would you rather have heard?
Well, I think there's a whole range of things. I'm not quite sure how radical he could have been. I mean, this is his first budget, but I'm surprised that bringing it forward so much. I thought that he might have already got some schemes underway. He's only really tinkered with what the Conservatives were doing previously.
What about the tax cuts for small business? Corporation tax, small business tax down. Do you think that will help you invest?
I think so, because it's an encouragement to take more people on, particularly with the schemes, and it's also an encouragement to invest more in the capital assets for the business, and that's good.
What else did you hear that you were encouraged by?
I was pleased by the childcare provision, the schemes that they've got for getting people back to work and looking after children.
But the reservations?
That it's all reliant totally on the windfall tax, and there may be legal actions threatened by a lot of the large companies that will actually delay that. The schools need books, computers and more teachers now. They can't wait until the windfall tax arrives.
All right, let's hear how education and health were received by a teacher and a doctor here in Chester. So, Millie, what about education? £1 billion coming your way.
Well, I'm extremely pleased that this government is honouring the pledges that they made before the election. And I must say this £1 billion will go quite a long way towards addressing some of the problems we've had in school with regard to books, equipment, computers for children. And I must say I am looking forward to it. I hope now that they will be able to give us some more money, and I know this sounds greedy, but really we are thinking about the teachers' pay rise, and the 3% teachers' pay rise I know can be a problem in certain areas. Certainly Cheshire is facing problems meeting that pay rise.
And Dr. George Foster, what about the NHS? Another £1 billion coming there?
Well, I think this country has the structure of the best health service in the world. It's always been the BMA's view that it needed an extra £1 billion a year to keep going, and I'm very pleased indeed that the Chancellor seems to be responsibly addressing this.
So encouraged so far?
Yes, and it certainly makes a change from previous budgets I've heard in recent years.
Dr. George Foster, thank you very much indeed. So encouraging news from the Chancellor from Chester. David.
And now let's go and join Jeremy Vine in Stoke-on-Trent and see what the effect of what the Chancellor has done is on taxpayers and how the windfall tax will be received up there by the water executive that we saw earlier on. Jeremy.
David, we have our little tax at a glance graph here behind us, and you will imagine from what Mr. Brown was saying that actually the weekly effect on all these salaries, £5,000 to £100,000, is not very much indeed if you're simply talking about direct taxation. In fact, it's no change at all the way down the line. However, when it comes to the windfall tax on the privatised utilities that we discussed earlier, to Anglian Water plc, one of the utilities whose accounts will be pumped for excess profits, of course they now know the method by which the Chancellor will be raising that money. He's looked at the tap marked profits. He's not going to turn that tap, nothing coming out of that one. There's the tap marked sales in second place, not turning that one, nothing coming out of that one. Chris Mellor is here, the Financial Director of Anglian Water plc. Mr. Mellor, we now know the pipeline the Chancellor is using it goes to this third tap. It's the tap marked shares. He's turning that one on. There it goes. Good news or bad?
Well, it looks as though it's a sort of combination, actually, of number 3 and number 1. 1.65 billion for the water sector as a whole looks a little bit higher than we expected. For Anglian, it probably means a number around about 170, 180 million. That's, we'll have to borrow to pay that tax. That means it's 170 million less money available for investment in improving services and the environment.
Now, we said you were between £50 million on a good scenario for you to £400 million. If this is the final figure for you, 170 million, you've got off pretty lightly, haven't you?
Well, it's in the middle of the range. It's still a big number, and as I said, we will have to borrow to pay it. That's 170 million we won't have to invest in improving services. But I'm pleased the Chancellor has confirmed it is a one-off. we'd like to put that behind us now and get on with the job of providing quality, efficient services to our customers.
Is there in that reaction a veiled threat that if the bill is really going to be that big, then customers in your area may not see the improvement in services and indeed the repaired pipes that they might expect?
Well, we simply won't have the capacity, because we'll have to borrow to pay that 170 million, to provide some of the services we would wish to have done otherwise. It's as simple as that.
Will you lobby the Chancellor? Is there a way you can try and reduce that figure?
I doubt it. Clearly we'll have to see the fine print of the bill, but it does seem to be pretty clear, and obviously the government has a mandate to introduce this. So providing it's legal, and I'm assuming it will be, we'll pay the tax, put it behind us and get on and improve services to customers as best we can.
Given that the lack of changes along the tax scale, particularly direct tax, this clearly was the centrepiece of the whole budget. Do you feel your money is being put to good use, bringing young unemployed people, long-term unemployed people back to work?
Oh, I can't argue with that. Certainly that's a very worthy objective. We would like to think that at least part of the money will come into the Anglian region to help unemployment there.
Mr. Miller, thank you. Mr. Miller is, of course, Financial Director of Anglian. That's the first reaction from one of the privatised utilities. David.
Thanks, Jeremy. Well, let's have a look at the other measures that will affect companies that were announced in the budget. First of all, there was a cut announced in corporation tax to 31%, and it'll take effect from April 97. That's a couple of months back. And the small companies rate of corporation tax was also cut to 21%. That's 2% down as well, also backdated, and the Chancellor said we now have the lowest tax rates in Europe and thought it would attract investment into Britain. On ACT, as widely predicted, the tax credit on dividends is abolished for companies and for pension funds. To encourage investment, on the other hand, there's a temporary doubling of the investment allowances for smaller firms for a year, which means that they can get 50% allowance against tax for new investment. So those are the main changes. Now the question is what people make of it. John Sopel is up in Edinburgh. Hi, John. And he's got with him a number of business people who will be looking very closely at how this will affect business and perhaps the stock market as well, John.
Yes, David, they've all been sitting here scribbling and looking at their calculators and looking at computer screens to try and make sense of it. Bill McCall, let me come to you first, because you're a UK fund manager for Tilney and Company. You said before the budget that what the Chancellor needed to do was almost use smart bombs to cool down consumer demand. Yep. Has he done enough to cool that demand down?
Well, I think the city is, at this moment, running over those numbers. The situation we've seen there from the utilities is very interesting. I can't quite see that he's taken enough heat out of the system, and we're now beginning to see the pound rising against the Deutschmark just now, which suggests that it may be over to the good old Bank of England to raise interest rates to dampen it. So the city is now saying, has he done enough to take the heat out of the system? Done plenty for companies in terms of investment, but so far as the consumer is concerned, these smart bombs perhaps maybe weren't enough of them and haven't hit the mark quite so big as expected.
So the consumer won't feel, well, I can't afford to go out and spend tomorrow as a result of this budget. They might still be out there, fueling the boom.
Well, I think the chart that we saw just a few moments ago is very interesting, that so far as you and I are concerned, John, unless we intend buying Mr. Blair's property, it won't really affect us too much. So I suspect in general terms, the feel-good factor will remain, and the city's now saying, well, how is the heat coming out of the system? Inflation might just be creeping up, and the Bank of England then might have to put rates up, and the pound is going better on the back of that.
Anne Middleton, you represent Unison up here in Scotland, and part of the Scottish TUC. I suppose you're fairly pleased, aren't you? Because there you've got your welfare to work, and the little rabbit out of the hat popped up with the extra money for the health service and extra money for education.
Well, I think we're very pleased with the Welfare to Work programme, particularly the aspect that addresses childcare, which has always been a major issue for us as to how we get people back to work without childcare facilities. The broad brush approach is good. We're also very keen to see extra money coming into the health service. It was a commitment given in the Labour manifesto. We welcome that they're removing the internal market and actually putting more money into services within health. I would say that we were also particularly pleased with the commitment given to the public services in the Welfare to Work programme, with substantial recognition of the role of voluntary organisation and the public sector in tackling the Environment Task Force project.
Was it much what you expected? I just wonder how much, I don't know, contact you'd had with Treasury people, not leaks of course, but I wonder whether you'd had any indication of that this was the broad thrust of what you were going to get.
You mentioned leaks. I would say that there had been suggestions as to what was going to come, and I think the windfall tax particularly had been well trawled. we also knew what the programme of welfare to work was going to be. I would say that we had some expectation in respect of income tax, although we do welcome the commitment given and the link to the minimum wage that has been made with our further income tax proposal.
Stuart McNabb from Pricewaterhouse. We've now got the method by which the windfall tax is going to be calculated. Yep. Is it broadly in line with what you expected?
I think broadly, yes. I mean, obviously the overall magnitude is what people were forecasting. I think the interesting aspect, though, is it's over 4 years post-privatisation, which is perhaps to address the BT question, and also that we're looking at...
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
Well, just in terms of the how long after privatisation was crucial as to where the levy would actually fall. The shorter the time after privatisation, the more it would fall on BT and companies such as that.
So it eases the burden on British Telecom?
Indeed, I think that's our initial reaction to that, and obviously some of the later privatisations won't be impacted at all because we're taking a 4-year window.
And when Gordon Brown said in his speech, as he did, that they could see no reason why prices should go up, no reason why investment should fall, no reason why the consumers should feel the pinch, do you think those the utilities themselves will be thinking that this evening?
I think there might be some disappointment, certainly on the investment front, that he did announce some changes to the capital allowances regime for small and medium-sized businesses, but of course he didn't address what Ken Clarke did in his last budget, which was to reduce the rate of capital allowances for spend for long life assets, which would be typically in the regulated sector.
And Marilyn Orchardson from the Small Business Bureau, let me come to you finally. It seemed to be a very pro-small business budget. Is that the way you read it, or...?
Yes, absolutely. He certainly reiterated his commitment to small businesses, and the cut in corporation tax is obviously welcome, plus the capital allowances, because presumably that will include technical equipment like computers, and an awful lot of small businesses could do with some computerisation and get themselves into the 21st century.
Bill McCall, I just want to come back to you finally. You said at the we heard an awful lot in the Commons before the speech about whether the prices had been affected by alleged leaks in the budget. What did you make of all of that?
Well, an interesting interpretation. Obviously, the City of London reads the wrong newspapers because the market reacted in the opposite direction. So we will leave it for the politicians to sort that one out, John.
So it didn't make sense. So the market didn't go up and down in the way that it would have done if that...
Well, you know, as we said at the outset, it's better to travel than arrive, and Mr. Brown has certainly arrived today.
OK, thank you very much, all of you. The reaction initially from here in Edinburgh. Back to you in the studio, David.
Now let's have a look then at the budget details that the Chancellor announced, just in summary first of all, and then we'll talk about what it is that he's actually done to the economy. No change on income tax rates, and none, he said, during the lifetime of this Parliament. And on Maris, the allowance you get on mortgage interest up to £30,000 at 15%, that's going to be cut to 10% next April. Stamp duty, when you buy a house, you pay 1% at the moment. On a house over £60,000, that's going to go up to 1.5% on homes over £250,000. Then he announced changes in duties. The ones on liquor don't take effect until next January, but then spirits will go up 19 pence a bottle, beer up a penny a pint, wine up 4 pence a bottle, so plenty of time to stock up on those to avoid having to pay those extra figures. And cigarettes don't go up either until the 1st of December this year, when they go up by 19 pence a pack, which is more than the increase that the Tories have put on them, and well above the rate of inflation, which is what they'd always said they would do. On motoring, the car tax disc goes up to £150 in November. Petrol goes up immediately, as does diesel, by 4 pence a litre. So those are the main changes in the immediate effect on tax, on income, all those things that affect you. But of course the big question about this is what it's going to do to the economy, whether in a year from now, after this first budget, Britain is going to be more or less prosperous, in a panic about overheating and inflation, or settling down and growing and investing. That's the job of the Chancellor, to get that right. So the question, first of all, Bridget Rosewell, will he have achieved that? Is the economy now going to run smoothly for a year? Has he done enough?
I think he might have overdone it, actually. I think that would be my concern, and almost done the wrong things too. So I'm a bit disappointed at the moment. The windfall taxes that he's got, the money comes in now, but the spending goes out later. So although they're supposed to balance, you know, it's a squeeze now, spend later, if you like. So that's a squeeze. And then he's putting further squeezes on pension funds. There's big money involved in this rather arcane business of advanced corporation tax. So that again is taking more money out of the economy. So the amount of money he's actually taking out now and next year is a lot compared to what we were expecting, and I think what probably the economy needs. But what it's not doing actually is the consumer side of the economy, which is the one that's moving ahead so smartly at the moment. He's done this stuff on the housing market, so he's changed the stamp duty, and he's cut back a little bit on Myrus, but to be honest, not really very much, considering that, I mean, my recommendation was to abolish the thing, the way that the housing market is going at the moment. So it's possible that what we could get is actually not the revival, certainly in the short term, a revival in investment the way that he would like to see it, because it's companies who will be worried about this stuff, while the consumer will keep on spending and possibly buying more imports. So there's the potential for it not really working out the way he would like.
So he should have done what to hit the consumer in the way you would
I think I would have abolished Myrus rather than stamp duty. After all, only happens when you actually buy or sell a house.
But they're talking about fairly small figures even on Myrus.
Well, indeed, that's right, even if you abolished it. But I think that would make a bit of a difference. And I think that I would have done something more to make people think a bit more twice about income, say like going for PRP or one of the sorts of things that Ken Clarke, after all, announced that he would do something about PRP, which is a rather stupid tax benefit and where there's quite a lot of money involved.
But just to summarise,
top incomes think twice.
So you think the economy will go on overheating because the consumers will go on spending?
I think that's a possibility.
And the investment won't come because it's clobbered companies?
Yes.
Peter J., do you agree with that analysis?
I think it's a terrible mistake to underestimate the importance of the fact that the Bank of England is sitting there with instructions to steer the economy along a non-inflationary course. So that if deliberately or by mistake the Chancellor either overdid it or underdid it in terms of its short-term impact on the economy, they would, if that's how they saw it, immediately move to counteract that. Now, the effect of what he's done today, which is to increase taxes by about 6 billion and reduce the budget deficit by about 5 billion in the present financial year and a slightly larger figure for next year on the economy, is very small beer. You don't, by and large, steer the modern economy through the budget. Nigel Lawson established that back in his May's lecture 13 years ago. Nowadays, the economy in the short term is steered through interest rates. They are now the responsibility of
even
the
if
bank.
Sterling rises and the exporters can't export and all that, you still
take all that into account, but it is the responsibility of the Bank of England to set interest rates in such a way as to steer the economy along a path that will be non-inflationary. Those are their instructions. The important thing about this budget, good or bad, is what credibility the long-term strategy for what the Chancellor calls deficit reduction will have in the markets. Now, if the markets believe that, then long-term interest rates, real interest rates, will tend to fall, and that will tend to encourage investment and have the good effects on growth in the economy that he hopes for. If they don't believe that, then the opposite will happen. Long-term interest rates will remain high, and the long-term growth will not materialize. But the focus of the budget strategy has to be, given that he's handed over steering of the short-term economy to the Bank of England, on the long term. And if he started trying to steer the short-term economy, you would have one car with two steering wheels, which would be absurd and destructive. Whether or not he was right to hand over to the Bank of England is another debate, but having done so, he now has to focus on the long term. And if the markets believe that the deficit really is going to be reduced in the way that he said, well, then long-term interest rates should be lower, and that should encourage investment.
Okay. Let's have a look at the way that personal finance has been changed by this. These are the main measures that were announced. There's going to be a scheme, which we'll hear about from Jill Knott in a moment, for individual savings accounts from 1999. And the stamp duty we heard about on homes goes from 1 to 1.5% when you buy a house over 250,000, 2% if it's over $500,000. Myrus, the allowance you get on mortgage interest, is cut from 15% to 10% in April. Those were some of the first measures he announced. And then in addition to that, the abolition of tax relief, this was the thing there was all the fuss about whether this was a leak or not, on private medical insurance for people over 60, it has been abolished. Oddly, the Chancellor said it hadn't achieved its effect of getting people to take out private medical insurance. But anyway, then help with childcare was announced for parents who have more than one child, £100 a week towards the cost of having somebody look after your child while you go to work would be allowed against benefit. And the VAT on domestic fuel, the cut that was again promised in the manifesto from 8% to 5%, has taken effect. Now, Jill, looking at this from the point of view of a person worried about their savings, worried about their pensions, and wondering how this has affected it, what's the difference going to be?
Well, I think there are some worrying signals here. they're going to be very relieved to hear that ACT isn't going to be, the reduction isn't going to be applied to PEPs. And I was encouraged to hear that the Chancellor is going to bring in an individual savings account, because there's...
Just what is that, actually?
Well, we don't know the details yet, but Labour have said that they want to have a simplified system of savings in the future. And he did make encouraging noises that they would build on the existing regime of PEPs and TESAs. And what many people hope is that rather than having this rather confusing situation where you can have two PEPs, one single company and one general, which has led to quite a lot of difficulties in the current round of demutualisations, where a number of people have got themselves into difficulties because they haven't understood this rather peculiar split. It would be much simpler to have a single box into which you put all your savings, however you chose to hold them, not necessarily in these different sorts of things. Now that's very, very encouraging, but what is of concern for the long term is really, quite frankly, clobbering the pension funds. As Bridget said, it's a huge sum of money that he's taking away from the pension funds in one fell swoop, and the compound interest effect on that is considerable. Now, a lot of pension funds are in quite a healthy state at present, but looking to the future, as this goes on, it will be more difficult for pension funds to index the payments they pay out, and individuals making their own provisions for pensions for the future will almost certainly have to think about increasing what they put away each year.
Are you talking about sort of 5% more or 10% more, or what sort of scale?
We can't know. We simply can't know, because the institutions will almost certainly pressure the companies to increase their dividend payout, and that will potentially have quite the reverse effect to what the Chancellor wants.
These big pension funds, of course, have
they own
huge
80% of the shares of the companies of the UK, so they're going to be leaning hard on the companies to say, right, I need compensation for this tax credit that I'm not getting.
How long will it be before some of these things emerge and the dust
Well,
settles?
I think the debate will start immediately, but we won't begin to see the real effect for 6 months to a year. And then a lot will depend upon whether interest rates go up and inflation goes up and pension funds have to start matching increases in cost of living.
Let's see what the immediate effect is on our families in Stoke, on the other hand. They'll, of course, be subject to all these things that may not happen for 6 months. But Jeremy Vine is up in Stoke-on-Trent and has families that we met before the budget, and now has the effect of all these changes on their private budgets. Jeremy.
That's exactly right. We've factored them in so we can get some idea of family fortunes here at G. Brown and Bross, our little shop. Remember our residents of the Midlands have joined us here. We have this budget button in front of us now, so when one of them hits that, they will find out whether they're better or worse off after what Gordon Brown has announced this afternoon. Let's just head back then, if we can, for the last time today, to Stirling Street, our graphicised street, and meet our first resident of it, Jo Bailey, single mother, just on the balcony of her council flat here, with her son Jordan, unemployed single parent. Jo, why don't you hit the red button so that we can see exactly what's happened to you. Computer just calculating now, and let's see what the result is. Direct tax, no change. Indirect tax, 30 pence richer. So you are better off by 30 pence a week, which presumably doesn't make that much difference.
No, but I'm thrilled to bits with the childcare provisions, although I don't know how much I'd get personally with only having one child. I'm also thrilled with the £75 a week that employers will be given to employers, and with the education package.
He talked about childcare in a very serious way. He talked about this £200 million going towards training people to look after your child among others as you try and get into work. Do you think that that is actually practical, that you'll find a place somewhere for your child?
I think it's an excellent idea, as long as the people that are being brought in to do this job are properly vetted and trained. I think it's a wonderful idea.
And you would hope at the end of this to get back to work?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
Also hoping to get back to work, and also in our Stirling Street here, just a few yards from Jo Bailey, is young Jeremy Wilkes, age 20, unemployed. Jeremy, I know you were hoping that the welfare to work scheme would look serious and effective for you. Fabian, why don't you just hit the red button on Jeremy's behalf, since he can't get round to it. Looking at our graphic here, it's calculating, and there's the result. Direct tax, no change. Indirect tax, £1.14 poorer. So, Jeremy, worse off by £1.14 a week, and on your dole payments, that is quite a serious amount. That's smoking, we think. The changes in cigarettes, what can you do about that?
Not a lot, apart from giving up smoking.
Will you do that?
If I can.
The main
Not
part of
easy.
the speech, as far as it affected you, was the windfall tax, welfare to work, and all the Chancellor said about that. Now, at the end of the day, did you feel that will actually get you a job?
Yeah, I really do. If employers are given that incentive to employ people like me, with an extra bonus or whatever, it's got to be good.
He talked about insulating pensioners' roofs, for example. Is that the sort of thing you fancy?
Not particularly, but...
You'd be prepared to do it?
If I had to, yeah. It's the only way I could live, yes.
Back to our graphic here, back to Stirling Street. Speaking of pensioners, let's go to our third residents here, Harry and Joan Blurton, £9,000 a year. Harry, I know your house has been insulated already, so you won't be asking Jeremy to do that. Why don't you just hit the button and see what's happened? Here come the changes for you. Direct tax, no change. No one's changed on direct tax. Indirect tax, 52 pence poorer. And so you are worse off by 52 pence a week. Now, that's the fact that VAT on domestic fuel, the reduction in that has been overwhelmed by changes in car tax and petrol and so on. So not what you were hoping for at all.
No, I think I should be worse off, really, because where the Chancellor spoke about insurance on vehicles and the insurance companies having to pay for the hospitalisation, I think that will send motor insurance policies up more so than what they are now.
Well, that isn't even factored in there, in fact, but you're quite right that if insurance companies have to pay for road accident victims, you'd be worried your premiums would rise.
Yes, yes.
So what do you make of this budget from a government that said it had pensioners in mind?
Well, I think it's a poor budget, actually, for the pensioner.
You're genuinely surprised to find yourself poor?
Yes, yes.
Our next resident of Stirling Street is an earning couple, Fabian and Debbie Thomas, who live just here. There they are with two of their children, £6,000 a year. Fabian, remember, runs a pub. Fabian, the button's right in front of you. Do give it a press. Direct tax, no change. Indirect tax, £2.21 poorer. So as a result, you're worse off by £2.21 a week. That's changes to beer, wine, and cigarettes, we understand. Now, when we were talking to you before, you were hoping for some kind of tax change that would help you. You haven't got that.
No.
What do you make of those results then, as far as you're concerned?
Probably because we smoke too much.
In your pub, you mentioned your pub and the fact that people are drinking less of the spirits and wines that you serve because they're going across the channel to get them. Are you pleased that Gordon Brown is going to pay some attention to that and do a review into it?
Oh yes, very pleased.
Are you disappointed that the personal taxation hasn't got more generous to you? Are you hoping for more out of this government?
I was hoping for a lot more. More, I don't know, but I was just hoping.
Have to wait for it. Okay, Fabian, thank you very much. Our next residents of Stirling Street, here they come. Just in the cul-de-sac round here, Colin and Val Mitchell. Daughter Corinne, remember her, and £20,000 a year, they're on average earnings. Now, Val, if you could just press the red button, that's it. Here we go with those changes. Direct tax, no change again. Indirect tax, £1.12 poorer. So as a result, total result, worse off by £1.12 a week. But I know that you were very pleased with something else that you heard in the budget.
I was pleased with everything. I mean, 1.2 billion on education, on health, on jobs. It's a budget for the future. Everybody's going to be better off in the long term. It's a terrific budget. And I'm proud of Labour.
You both voted, well, you said you were old Labour beforehand.
Yeah, I've changed now.
You've now new Labour as a result of this budget.
Yeah.
So, Colin, all the spending plans that he suggested for health and education sounds a bit like that he's smashed his election pledges to stick to the Conservative spending levels, but you won't complain about that, I guess.
Well, I won't complain at all. I suspect that the many millions of people that very nervously voted Labour this time are now very happy with that decision they made, and it can only be good for our future, for our kids to get jobs. That's got to be a good thing.
Next residents just across the cul-de-sac here, Peter and Sandra Morby, sewing machine business, £40,000 a year. Peter, I know you were mentioning about your cars and your vans earlier on. Let's see what has happened to you. Button's been hit. Here comes the figures. Direct tax, no change. Indirect tax, £4.95 poorer. As a result, worse off by £4.95 a week. That's factoring in the Mirus changes. But all in all, the changes that you were fearing on the cars didn't happen to the extent you thought.
It's nowhere near as bad as I was expecting for me. And I'm really very pleased with the result of this budget and the the increase in the allowance for the investment on small businesses from 25 to 50% is very good, yes.
Our last residents of Stirling Street, let's see how they fared. By far the richest people on the block, just around here past the privatised utility, the Thatchers, Helen and Stan Thatcher. There's their house, £100,000 a year. Stan, why don't you hit the red button here and let's see what the changes are for you. Here they come. Direct tax, no change again. Indirect tax, £6.36 poorer. Worse off by £6.36 a week. Well, for a man on £100,000, you can't complain too much about that, I wouldn't have thought.
That's no problem, but as I forecast earlier, that there has been tax increases right across the spectrum. If that's encouragement for the future, then I don't know what is. I was better off at the last budget.
You've got to sell this house of yours, it's £250,000 house, you're going to be paying more stamp duty on that, aren't you?
Well,
you're just within the bracket. But don't you think someone who earns the amount you earn would expect to pay more in tax under Labour government?
Negligible. What I'm pleased about is the help for small businesses in the corporation tax reduction, the first year help on capital expenditure, and the £75 a week for the long-term unemployed. This does help my small company, but I thank the Tories for letting them inherit, you know, a strong economy to be able to do it.
Thank you. Now, just before we go, David, we should point out a little story that's happened here this afternoon. As a result of Stan Thatcher here, who runs a precision tools business, meeting Jeremy Wilkes here, who's unemployed, Stan has offered Jeremy a training place or a job. Well, tell us about that.
That I've applied for a European grant for high technical machinery. A part of the parcel of it is, or the part of the parcel of the acceptance to get the grant, I am forced basically to employ more people, obviously.
So, Jeremy, will you take it?
If he wants to take
possibly.
it,
I'll have to think about that.
You're going to think about it, all right? Back to you, David, in London.
Right. Don't all write in to join Jeremy Vine in the next budget. Now, I'm joined now by two guests who've arrived here. Alistair Darling, Chief Secretary of the Treasury, and next to him, the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, Kenneth Clarke, and Malcolm Bruce, the Liberal Democrats spokesman on Treasury Affairs. Before I come to you, very briefly, Robin Oakley, what do you think of that budget? How do you think he did in political terms?
Delivered with considerable gravitas. I think the thing that struck me most of all was consistency. I've been back through Gordon Brown's speeches over the years. Constant theme is underinvestment, what can be done about unemployment in this country, social justice. I think he's fulfilled those themes. Looking back to the election, great concern of both parties was Mondeo man, Worcester woman, Middle England. Well, I don't think they'll be too upset with this. Everybody expects cigarettes and petrol to go up as much as rain comes down. And the Tories are clearly going to make their attack centred on what's happening on MIRAS, mortgage tax relief, stamp duty and so on. But of course, they'd been starting to have MIRAS withering on the vine anyway. They'd been trimming back on it. A little problem for them there. I think Labour's big problem going into this budget was the potential disappointment on their own side at the lack of spending that there seemed to be on health and on education. Gordon Brown's found a way of doing that. I think he'll pacify his own side and minimise the Tory attack.
Curious that, because all through we were told they were going to stick to Tory spending plans. Here is a reminder of what that Gordon Brown said he'll do. He's found the money in some pocket or other for an extra £1.2 billion on the NHS this year, and £1 billion for schools from the reserves, and then £1.3 billion on top of that over the next 5 years, which perhaps not quite so much. Now, Kenneth Clarke, what do you make of this budget? Do you admire what Gordon Brown did, or are there holes in it that you think?
Well, I think he delivered it well, but the budgets that always go wrong are the ones where your own backbenchers wave order papers. That happened on my first budget, and they all hated it 6 months later, because I was doing what Gordon's done, which is really banging up taxation in quite a big way. This is a big tightening of policy budget. Hasn't hit the ordinary voter too much. He hasn't hit consumer taxes in any very unexpected way, which means it hasn't done much to slow down any supposed overheating. It's hit the corporate sector pretty heavily.
So the effect will be what in a year's time?
Slowing down the economy, I think. He is trying to get a free lunch out of the windfall tax. He's gone for the biggest possible hit on that. I approve of his spending some of it on schools' capital. That was a genuinely well-judged, popular measure. Otherwise, I fear his welfare to work won't produce what they claim. The changes to advanced corporation tax, nobody understands. They raise an enormous amount of money, mainly out of pension funds. They make capital more expensive, which is a bad thing. He has gone back, fortunately, on this insistence that I would have stuck to the figures I penciled in for next year to health and education. He's pulled the reserve down, to use the technical phrase, which is what I
all
always do.
chancellors do.
But they're small figures. They're not very big figures for health or education. Right. They're smaller than most of the health increases we managed over the last 10 years.
Malcolm Bruce, slightly taking the wind out of the Liberal Democrat sails by doing that money on education and the NHS.
No, I mean, we welcome any additional funding, but it certainly completely gives the lie to maintaining the departmental ceilings, which he's repeated time and again as his intention.
But you're pleased?
Well, of course we're pleased. But there's no extra money.
You won the day.
Sorry, there's no extra money this year. He's talking about next year.
Yeah.
And it's, in education terms, it's about half what we believed was necessary and what indeed the local authorities were looking for. So I think to suggest he solved the problem in education is simply not true. And I think anybody can blow the contingency reserves. That actually is for contingencies. What if he has a crisis next year and he's blown it? I mean, that is not, I have to say, the Iron Chancellor. That's a pretty woolly Chancellor.
OK, Alistair Darling, you're woolly Chancellor.
Well, the contingency reserve that we have remaining is actually larger than the one that is available this year. What we've done, as all chancellors do, is to allocate a proportion of the reserve, £100.2 billion for health, £1 billion for education, to enable both those services to plan over the next 21 months.
But you did say you weren't going to increase spending. You said you were going to use Kenneth Clarke's plans.
The control total remains absolutely the same. Now, what we said, as they're
both saying, you said the departments would stay the same.
I know what I said, because I said it in the House of Commons a couple of weeks ago, that we told our heads of departments to work within the departmental totals. It was always anticipated that the reserve would be drawn down to some extent, and we've done that. But I think the important message from today's budget is that not only are we delivering on our manifesto promises in many, many different ways, but we're laying the firm foundations to get the prosperity that we need to finance schools and hospitals in the future. We've embarked on a policy that we believe that will provide stability to the economy. We have brought forward major investment measures, reducing corporation tax rates, that we've got some of the lowest rates now anywhere amongst our competitors, which will encourage people to invest and create the growth and the wealth that we want. And we've also embarked on a major programme of modernising the welfare state. That's absolutely essential. So what you're seeing from us is actually a government that is delivering on what we promised to do.
Okay. Well, we'll see whether what was popular on the back benches, as Dennis Healer was saying, doesn't last more than 6 months. We shall see 6 months from now. But thank you very much for joining us, all of you, on this budget coverage. Good afternoon.